Are you ready to leave yet? I asked, glancing around the nearly empty room. Just waiting for the mover, Snow replied with a sigh. Honestly, it'll be a relief not seeing your face anymore. And changing the locks so meticulously as if I'd break in, that was just too much. I used to wonder why we needed such precautions, but now it all seems trivial. When I first met my husband, he was timid, always worried about what others thought. But after we got married, he turned into the classic henpecked husband. A week after moving into my new place, my husband showed up, frantic. It's me. Open up, he pleaded. Huh? Who are you? I feigned ignorance, facing my frantic husband. I'm Scarlett, 35, working part-time 3 days a week. It's been 2 years since I married Anthony. We didn't have kids, but I thought we could still be happy together. In the early days of our marriage, we'd spend nights talking about our hopes for the future. Neither of us had much experience with love, so it was tentative at first, but I thought we enjoyed each other's company. Let's be one of those couples who stay close even as we get older. Yeah, I like that idea. Maybe, 2 kids. That's exactly what I was thinking. A boy and a girl. Really? Me too. Such casual conversations amused me, someone who had little interest in love or marriage. Meeting Anthony came as a surprise. We crossed paths at a party I attended reluctantly, just to fill in numbers. He seemed to be in the same boat and we bonded over our similar situations, eventually becoming friends. Back then, he was serious and somewhat shy, always considerate towards me, which I found endearing. And then, out of the blue, Scarlett, will you marry me? I want to make you happy. What? But we're not even dating yet. Oh, right. His sudden proposal didn't deter me. Instead, I wondered if maybe it could work with him. If you're okay with me, then yes, I accept. Really? Absolutely. I still recall Anthony's joy when I agreed to marry him. I believe wholeheartedly that with Anthony, my future could be happy. We tied the knot only 3 months after meeting, a whirlwind for both of us. With our limited romantic experience, we often stumbled through, but that was part of the adventure. Not long after, we moved in together, but after about a month, the gap between my ideals and reality started to become apparent. Scarlett, there's something I'd like to discuss with you. What is it? That day, Anthony appeared different, more serious and tense. I hate to bring this up, but could you consider quitting your job and becoming a homemaker? What? His sudden request shocked me. I couldn't fathom why he would ask such a thing. He had never previously mentioned any dissatisfaction with my job, and this was just the beginning. May I ask why? I inquired, puzzled by his sudden change. When Scarlett works, it makes me feel like I'm not needed. Did someone say that to you? It's not that, but all the wives of married men in my company are stay-at-home moms. I had made it clear from the start of our marriage that I wanted to keep working, especially since saving money was crucial for our future. Anthony's sudden insistence on this issue left me bewildered. But we agreed I would continue working after we got married, didn't we? I know, but as my wife, Scarlett, I hope you'll consider my perspective. Then why not just pretend I've quit? There's no need for me to actually leave my job. I reiterated my reluctance to quit, but Anthony seemed more concerned about social appearances. My attempts to reason with him fell on deaf ears. Look, if things stay this way, I'll face ridicule from my colleagues and bosses. I'm the head of this household, aren't I? Please just do as I ask. Either way, I can't make a decision on the spot. Let me think about it. All right, but please decide soon. Yet I knew I couldn't let things linger. I worried about what might come next if I didn't act promptly. So I sought advice from my boss, Robinson. I had been working as an administrative assistant at the company since I graduated from high school. Robinson herself had faced a similar situation. Her ex-husband had been controlling, and she had eventually divorced him. Now she's a dedicated single mother whom I greatly admire. That must have been tough. I've considered divorce, but it's complicated since we're newlyweds. Yes, I haven't thought about that yet. But if you quit, it'll be hard to find someone to replace you, Scarlett. I'm not planning to quit outright. I want to find a way to continue working, if possible. How about we stick with our current part-time arrangement for now? Going full-time might attract too much attention. That's a smart move. I'll talk it over with Anthony. If he still opposes it, I'll take Robinson's advice and request part-time hours. Sounds like a sensible plan. Remember, you can always rely on me for guidance. I'm here to support you as your senior. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Our conversation continued, and I learned that Robinson's ex-husband had also undergone a significant change after marriage, much like my own situation. It was a revelation. I had never considered the possibility before, but now I realize that some men completely transform after marriage, almost becoming different people. Looking at it from this angle, perhaps I had been deceived. Despite numerous discussions with Anthony, we remained deadlocked. Anyway, isn't it a woman's role after marriage to listen to her husband and manage the household? What era are you living in? Nowadays, it's common for both spouses to work. Maybe for other couples, but we're different. You see that, don't you? I understand your perspective, but I can't agree with it. Please try to see things from my point of view. Following that, Anthony persisted daily until I would concede to quitting my job. Ultimately, his efforts to persuade me fell short. I reached out to Robinson and decided to formally resign. However, in reality, I continued to work part-time, 3 days a week. Thankfully, my boss understood my predicament and allowed me to reduce my hours. I resigned from my job at the company just as Anthony wanted. Really? Thank you. Now I can feel more secure about my position at work. I'm glad to hear that. By now, it seemed Anthony was solely focused on how others perceived him. I couldn't help but feel bewildered by his abrupt transformation. I chose to deceive him, hoping to salvage our relationship, but soon realized it was a mistake. I had hopes starting anew would improve things between us, yet he continued to assert his superiority and direct his frustrations at me. Today, a junior colleague is coming over. I need you to host. What? I had no idea. Sorry, it was a last-minute decision. Just keep it simple. Please get everything ready. Wait a minute. He hung up, so I prepared drinks and snacks for the guests. However, Anthony appeared displeased. Didn't I ask you to prepare for today? You mentioned just keeping it basic. And you took that literally. This reflects poorly on me. I need you to fulfill your role as a wife properly. What exactly does that mean? I did my best. Is there an issue with me? No, not really. Anthony's expression was unlike anything I had seen before. I was so taken aback that I couldn't find any words. From then on, he started inviting guests over almost every week. While he enjoyed himself, he expected me to be on standby, prepared for anything. I think he wanted to impress everyone with how capable a husband he is. Anthony, having guests over every week seems excessive. No, it's fine. Everyone enjoys it, and you should support my decisions. It's your duty as my wife, Scarlett. But it's also expensive. You'll figure it out. Yet Anthony's extravagance showed no signs of slowing down. How exactly am I supposed to manage it? Oh, stop complaining. Whenever I asked a question he didn't like, he dismissed it as nagging and avoided giving a direct answer. Every morning, after waking up, preparing meals, making lunch sandwiches, and seeing Anthony off with a suit ready for his day, I tackled household chores. On days when I worked part-time from 10 o'clock a.m. to 3 o'clock p.m., there was barely any time to rest. Despite the busyness, I cherished my job, and working often felt like a welcome respite. Scarlett, you seem tired lately. Are you? Yeah, a bit actually. Let me know if there's anything I can do. I'm here to help in any way I can, of course. Thank you, Sophia. You've been such a reliable support. Unlike Anthony, you've noticed how his treatment of me has been deteriorating day by day. Sophia knew about my secret part-time work and kept it hidden from Anthony. I appreciate everything, Sophia. Don't mention it, but I never imagined Anthony would behave like this. Neither did I. I've tried talking to him, but he won't listen, and we can hardly have a meaningful conversation anymore. I'm sorry, if only I were stronger. Don't be too hard on yourself. You're managing work and household tasks admirably. I really appreciate all your help. I'm glad to hear that. Living with Sophia had been nothing but a positive experience for me. However, it seemed Anthony wasn't comfortable with how close Sophia and I had become, and because of that, he made a shocking decision. Where's Sophia? Mom's gone. What do you mean, gone? Mom's getting older, and I thought it would be best for her to be in a facility. You actually placed her in a home. Yeah, just finished settling her into the new place. Now I have the house to myself. I couldn't believe it happened while I was at my parents' home. The fact that he placed his own mother in a facility shocked me. She was injured, but not to the extent that she needed full-time care. He must have sent Sophia away just to have the house to himself. When I visited Sophia at the facility, she seemed surprisingly well. I'm sorry it had to come to this. No, Sophia, it's not your fault. I never expected him to go to such lengths. I'm afraid of what he might do if I resist. I'll miss Sophia, but I'll manage. If you need anything, you're always welcome here. Thank you. Afterward, we moved into my in-laws' house from our previous home. Despite managing the household, Anthony never acknowledged my efforts or showed gratitude. The idea of having children, which we had once eagerly discussed, now seemed completely out of reach. Anthony disregarded me, often preferring to spend his time away from home. On top of that, he began imposing arbitrary rules. No matter how late Anthony returned, I was required to stay awake until his arrival. If I happened to wake up later than him in the morning, he would become upset. What time will you be home today? I'm not sure. Just stay up until I get back, okay? Okay. One day, after a similar exchange, when Anthony returned home, I noticed something unusual as I took his suit to hang it up. There was a fragrance in the air, a sweet feminine scent that was unfamiliar to me. Since I didn't wear perfume, it was unmistakable evidence of an affair. Whenever he came home late, I would catch whiffs of the same perfume. That day, he'd unusually suggested I go to bed before him, raising my suspicions. Quietly, I went to the living room and overheard their conversation. Oh, she's clueless. When are you going to leave her? I'll kick her out soon enough. Their voices carried clearly, especially the woman's, which was quite loud. From their discussion, it was evident their relationship had been ongoing for some time. While the perfume incident hadn't surprised me, I was deeply disgusted. He was still technically my husband, and despite my wishful thinking, his mistreatment of me hadn't changed. It was nearing our 2-year mark of marriage. It's sudden, but I have a business trip. The day after tomorrow, I need you to get everything ready. That's very short notice. I'll be away for about 3 days. Please make sure my clothes are prepared. Got it. I can't believe he could make up such a lie about a business trip. It wasn't a business trip, it was a trip with his mistress. I recall the conversation I had with Anthony's colleague's wife when we met previously. Be cautious if he suddenly mentions a business trip. Our company doesn't even have those. I had already discovered evidence earlier. I found a chat on his mobile phone, left in the living room, detailing how he had taken paid leave for this supposed trip. It marked the beginning of the end for our marriage. Armed with proof of his affair, I intended to confront him with divorce papers upon his return. However, it was my husband who made the first move. Are you ready to leave? The movers will be here soon. That was the first thing he said upon returning home. He instructed me to vacate the house while he was away. I need you to be gone before I get back. What? Why are you saying this all of a sudden? That's exactly what I said. You can't spring this on me and expect me to leave immediately. Then I'll wait a bit, but start preparing to leave. Goodbye. I never imagined my once timid, overly concerned about others' opinions husband would transform into such a submissive partner. But this was the final straw. The future I once envisioned with him now felt like a distant memory. Living with such a man, I couldn't envision a bright future ahead. I wonder what comes next. This could get interesting. Has the mover arrived yet? No need to rush, they should be here soon. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention, I'm changing the locks on the house. Alright, got it. The thought of not having to see your face again is a relief. I couldn't believe those were his parting words after nearly 2 years of marriage. Convinced our relationship was over, I swiftly left the premises. Soon after, I instructed my lawyer to file for divorce. Despite our circumstances, my husband boldly posted pictures with his mistress on social media. I couldn't fathom his audacity. How could he be so reckless? Not realizing he was providing evidence of his affair, even our mutual friends noticed his strange behavior and reached out to inquire. After leaving my in-laws' home, I returned to full-time work, transitioning from part-time. Additionally, I moved into the suburban high-rise apartment I had long dreamed of. It was spacious for one person, but without Anthony, it felt wonderfully comfortable. I had been waiting anxiously for any sign of contact from him. Then one morning about a month after settling into my new place, the doorbell rang. Checking the monitor, I was surprised to see Anthony standing there. Hey, it's me, Anthony. Open up, Scarlett. His abrupt demand to be let in was presumptuous beyond belief. I couldn't comprehend his actions anymore. Deciding to feign ignorance, I thought it might be more entertaining than simply turning him away. Who are you? I'm sorry, but I don't know you. Don't tell me you've forgotten your husband's face. I'm not married. I think you've mistaken me for someone else. He appeared desperate, almost on the brink of tears, a shadow of his former timid self from our earlier days. Despite his plea, I stood firm and continued to treat him like a stranger. Please just listen. I've been deceived and I need Scarlett's help. I'm sorry, but I'm not obligated to assist you. If you persist, I'll have to call the police. Seriously. After all, I don't know you. Anthony must have believed I would always be there to resolve his problems. But the person I had become wouldn't entertain such thoughts. Yet my patience was wearing thin with a husband who refused to give up. That's it. You made this mess, so it's up to you to fix it. You don't have to be so tough on me. What? Oh, and by the way, you can't stay at your parents' place anymore. What do you mean? Do you know whose name the house is under? No, but it used to belong to Sophia. Now it's in my name. Why? I explained to Anthony why things had reached this point. Anthony insisted I leave. When I confided in Sophia, even she was visibly upset and disappointed. I can't believe my son has turned out like this. I'm truly sorry, especially after all the help you've given us, Sophia. You're divorcing Anthony, aren't you? Yes, it's for the best. In that case, I'll transfer the house to you. Why would Sophia transfer their rights to their in-laws' house to me? Anthony had no idea he was living with his mistress throughout all of this. That's the situation. Understand and leave promptly. We likely won't cross paths again anyway. Just one more thing. If he persists, I will call the police. With that, he finally relented and departed. Of course, the divorce proceeded as planned and I received the settlement guarantee from him. As it turned out, Anthony had been deceived and financially drained by his mistress. In addition to that, the divorce settlement totaled approximately $20,000. His mistress had promptly abandoned him, but I wasn't about to let it go. I employed both a lawyer and a detective to locate him. I'm also pursuing a divorce settlement claim from him. It appears I can secure over $10,000. Furthermore, ownership of the house was officially transferred to me. I had to insist that Anthony leave, and though he initially resisted, legal processes left him no choice but to comply. I'm unaware of his current residence and frankly, I have no interest. His company also discovered the photos he posted with his mistress on social media. Unable to endure the scrutiny due to his past facade of living extravagantly, he chose to resign voluntarily. The outcome felt inevitable given his true character. If I had one last thing to say, it would be this. I don't dwell on it. I'm divorced now, but I view it as a learning opportunity and opt to move forward positively. My bond with Sophia endures. I intend to concentrate on my career independently and relish life as a single person.
During our 10th anniversary dinner at the fancy Italian restaurant downtown, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with Nolan. His smiles seemed forced, and he kept glancing at his phone whenever it buzzed in his pocket. A tiny crease formed between his eyebrows, like he was anxious about something. "Everything okay?" I asked, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. The candlelight flickered in his brown eyes as he looked up. "Yeah, of course. Just work stuff. You know how it is." Nolan flashed me a reassuring grin, but I could tell he was holding something back. As we dug into our plates of linguine alla vongole, I tried to push the nagging feeling aside and enjoy the evening. Nolan and I had been together for over a decade, since we met in college. Back then, we were just two kids dreaming of building a life together in Seattle. Now, at 35, I was living that dream. A cozy house in the suburbs, a fulfilling job as an elementary school teacher, and a kind, loving husband who worked at a tech firm downtown. We didn't have kids yet, but we were comfortable and happy, or so I thought. Nolan reached for the bottle of Chianti to refill his glass, his third of the night. "To us," he said, raising his glass with a tight smile. 10 years down, forever to go." I clinked my glass against his, trying to ignore the way his eyes kept darting to his phone. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Nolan loved me, didn't he? But as the nights turned into weeks of his increasingly distant behavior, those niggling doubts only grew stronger. I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Something was very wrong in my perfect little world. "Maybe he's just going through a phase," Cora said over coffee one morning, her brow furrowed with concern. "Men can be like that sometimes. get distant when they're stressed about work or whatever. I shook my head, staring into the depths of my latte. It's more than that, Cora. You should see how he is at home these days. Nolan had been coming home later and later from the office, his smiles growing forced by the day. We barely spoke anymore, and when we did, it felt like pulling teeth to get more than one-word answers out of him. He's constantly on his phone, typing away furiously whenever I leave the room, I confided. And the other night, when I suggested we go out for our usual date night, he just mumbled some excuse about having to work late. Cora reached across the table, squeezing my hand. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry you're going through this. Have you tried talking to him about it? A bitter laugh escaped my lips. You think I haven't? Every time I bring it up, he just brushes me off, says he's been swamped at work and that it's nothing to worry about. But I knew better. Call it a wife's intuition, but deep down, I could sense that something was seriously wrong in our marriage. The Nolan I fell in love with, the caring, attentive man who used to dote on me, was slowly slipping away, replaced by this cold, distant stranger. That evening, I decided to try one more time. As Nolan sat on the couch, scrolling mindlessly on his phone, I approached him. Nolan, we need to talk. My voice was steady, but my heart pounded in my chest. He glanced up, his expression unreadable. About what? About us. Our marriage. I took a deep breath. I can't help but feel like you've been pulling away lately, and I want to know why. For a moment, he just stared at me, his jaw clenched. Then, with a heavy sigh, he set his phone down. It's just been really stressful at work, Lila. You know how demanding my job can be. I crossed my arms unconvinced. That's not a good enough excuse, and you know it. We're supposed to be partners, remember? For better or worse. But lately, it feels like you've checked out of our marriage completely. Nolan ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched onto his face. Look, I'm trying my best here, okay? Cut me some slack. Some slack? I repeated, my voice rising. Nolan, I deserve better than this. We deserve better than what you've been giving our marriage. His lips pressed into a thin line, and for a split second I saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt, perhaps? But as quickly as it came, it was gone, replaced by a cold, detached expression. Maybe you're right, he muttered, standing up abruptly. Maybe this isn't working anymore. And with that, he grabbed his keys and walked out the door, leaving me standing there in stunned silence, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. A few weeks later, Nolan's company was hosting a big gala event to celebrate some major client wins. As his wife, I was expected to attend and play the part of the doting partner. Despite the growing rift between us, I agreed, hoping it might be a chance for us to reconnect. The venue was a swanky downtown hotel, and I had picked out a sleek black dress that hugged my curves just right. If Nolan wasn't going to make an effort, at least I could look good for myself. As we mingled with Nolan's colleagues and their partners, I plastered on a fake smile, making small talk about work and the weather. Nolan stuck close by my side, but his eyes kept drifting across the room, like he was searching for someone. That's when I spotted her. A tall, slender woman with long chestnut hair cascading over her bare shoulders. Her red dress clung to her body like a second skin, leaving little to the imagination. She was laughing at something a man had said, throwing her head back in an exaggerated gesture. Nolan's gaze locked onto her, and I felt a pang of recognition. This woman looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't quite place her. Before I could ponder it further, the woman's eyes met Nolan's, and she excused herself from her conversation partner. My heart sank as she began sauntering over to us, a predatory gleam in her eyes. Nolan, she purred, resting a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. I've been looking for you all night. He cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. Ivy, this is my wife, Lila. Lila, this is Ivy Richardson. She's a new project manager at the company. My smile froze on my face as realization hit me like a punch to the gut. So this was the woman Nolan had been messaging constantly. I was sure of it. Ivy's eyes raked over me with thinly veiled disdain. Charmed, I'm sure, she drawled, making no effort to hide her contempt. Likewise, I managed to choke out, my grip tightening around my champagne flute. Nolan laughed nervously, oblivious to the charged tension between us. Well, you two should get to know each other better. Ivy's been doing great work on the Henderson account. Is that so? I asked through gritted teeth, shooting daggers at Ivy with my eyes. She smirked, running her hand slowly down Nolan's arm. We've certainly been working closely together on a lot of things. The insinuation in her tone was undeniable, and a sickening realization washed over me. My husband, my Nolan, was having an affair with this vile, shameless woman right under my nose. I opened my mouth to unleash the torrent of fury building inside me, but Nolan cut me off. Actually, I was just about to grab us some drinks from the bar. Can I get you anything, Ivy? His voice was laced with a strange eagerness that made my skin crawl. A dirty martini would be lovely, Ivy purred, her hand lingering on Nolan's arm for a beat too long. As he hurried off towards the bar, I rounded on Ivy, my face flushed with rage. I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing here, but let me make one thing crystal clear. Nolan is my husband, and if you think you can just swoop in and steal him away, you've got another thing coming. Ivy tossed her hair over her shoulder, utterly unfazed by my outburst. Oh, sweetie, the only one playing games here is your dear husband. But by all means, keep deluding yourself into thinking you actually mean something to him. Her words cut deeper than any knife, and I had to fight back the urge to slap that smug grin right off her face. Instead, I clenched my fists, trying to rein in my emotions. You're going to regret this, I hissed through clenched teeth. I'll make sure of it. Ivy let out a mocking laugh. Empty threats from a sad, pathetic woman. How deliciously tragic. She turned on her heel and sauntered away, leaving me seething and humiliated in the middle of the crowded ballroom. As Nolan rejoined me, oblivious to what had just transpired, I felt a cold, hard knot of determination form in the pit of my stomach. If it was war she wanted, then war was what she'd get. I would make Ivy regret the day she ever laid eyes on my husband. In the days following the gala, I barely slept or ate. My mind was consumed by the image of Ivy's hand trailing down Nolan's arm, her voice dripping with smugness as she all but admitted to their affair. The betrayal burned like acid in my veins. I needed proof. Solid, undeniable evidence that I could shove in Nolan's face and make him see the truth. Maybe then some small part of the man I loved would resurface and put an end to this madness. So one night, as Nolan snored lightly beside me, I reached over and snatched his phone off the nightstand. My hands trembled as I tapped in his passcode, our anniversary date, a bitter irony. The phone unlocked, revealing a flurry of messages from a contact simply labeled IR. My heart pounded as I opened the thread. There it was, in black and white. Hundreds of messages between Nolan and Ivy, some innocuous but many far too intimate for mere colleagues. Can't wait to see you tonight, handsome. You looked incredible at the party. That dress left little to the imagination. I missed the feeling of your lips on mine. White-hot rage seared through me as I read their shameless exchanges. This was so much worse than I'd imagined, a full-blown emotional affair at the very least. Bile rose in my throat, but I forced myself to keep reading, taking screenshots to document the evidence. I needed ammunition for the war that was about to come. As I scrolled further back in time, my blood ran cold at one particular message from Nolan. You're right. I do need to end things with Lila. This has gone too far, and she deserves better than living a lie. My hands went numb, nearly dropping the phone. He'd been planning to leave me, to discard me like a piece of trash for that vile succubus Ivy. A choked sob escaped my lips before I could stop it. Nolan stirred beside me. Lila? He mumbled groggily. What's wrong? I turned to face him, tears streaming down my cheeks, clutching his phone like a lifeline. How could you? I whispered hoarsely. How could you do this to me, to us? His eyes went wide as he took in the phone, panic flashing across his features. Lila, I can explain. Explain what? I spat, anger eclipsing my hurt. That you've been carrying on an affair with that woman behind my back? That you were going to leave me for her? Nolan opened and closed his mouth, at a loss for words. Pathetic. I loved you, I choked out, my voice thick with emotion. I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me? He surged forward, reaching out as if to embrace me. Baby, please, it's not what it looks like. But I recoiled from his touch, holding up the phone defiantly. Don't you dare try to deny it, Nolan. I have all the proof I need right here. His face crumpled in resignation as he slowly sank back onto the bed. I'm so sorry, he whispered brokenly. I never meant to hurt you. I let out a bitter laugh, swiping at the tears on my cheeks. Well, you did. You hurt me more than you'll ever know. As I turned and stormed out of the bedroom, clutching the phone with the damning evidence, a newfound sense of purpose burned within me. If Nolan thought he could just toss me aside and ride off into the sunset with his mistress, he had another thing coming. I was done being the victim. It was time to plan my revenge. Armed with the incriminating evidence from Nolan's phone, I knew I had to confront him and Ivy directly. No more dancing around the issue. It was time to blow this sordid affair wide open. A few days later, I marched into Nolan's office building downtown, my heels clicking determinedly against the marble floors. The security guard eyed me warily as I blazed past the reception desk. "Ma'am, you can't just go up there," he called out, but I ignored him, stabbing the button for the elevators. When I stepped out onto Nolan's floor, I spotted him immediately through the glass walls of his office. He was bent over his desk, completely engrossed in whatever was on his computer screen. Ivy was there too, perched on the edge of his desk in a tight skirt that rode dangerously high up her thighs. She leaned in close as they pored over the documents together, her chest practically spilling out of her blouse. White-hot fury licked at my insides as I watched their intimate display. Gripping the manila envelope containing the printed text messages, I stormed over and flung the door open with a bang. Nolan's head snapped up, his eyes widening in shock and fear. "Lila, what are you doing here?" Ivy simply raised an immaculately groomed eyebrow, her lips curling into a disdainful smirk. Well, if it isn't the little wife." I leveled my gaze at her, jaw clenched. "Save it, you home-wrecking snake. I know all about your sordid little affair with my husband." Reaching into the envelope, I pulled out the printouts and flung them onto Nolan's desk, the papers fluttering across the surface. Nolan went deathly pale as he scanned the indisputable evidence. "How did you—" "Does it matter?" I seethed, rounding on him. "What matters is that you've been lying and cheating on me this entire time." I turned back to Ivy, who was examining her manicured nails with a bored expression. "And you make me sick, preying on my husband like some cheap, shameless hussy." A mocking laugh bubbled from her lips. "Oh, feisty. I can see why Nolan's so smitten." She traced a finger along Nolan's arm, her touch lingering just a beat too long. "Isn't that right, handsome?" My blood boiled at her taunting words. In that moment, something inside me snapped. Before I could stop myself, I lunged forward and slapped Ivy clear across the face, the sound reverberating through the office like a gunshot. "You bitch!" she shrieked, clutching her stinging cheek. Her perfectly coiffed hair was mussed, mascara smudged under her eyes. "You're gonna regret that." Nolan leapt to his feet, grabbing my arms to restrain me. "Lila, stop! You're causing a scene." But I wasn't finished. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I wheeled on him next. "No, you stop!" I shouted, shoving him away from me. "This is the only way either of you snakes will listen. I want a divorce, Nolan. This marriage is over." He froze, his expression crumpling. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw remorse flicker in his eyes. "Lila, please," he started, reaching out imploringly, but I cut him off with a cold, steely glare. "You made your bed, Nolan. Now you can lie in it, with her." I jabbed an accusing finger at Ivy, whose cheeks were still flushed with outrage. As I turned on my heel and stormed out, I could hear the shocked murmurs of Nolan's coworkers who had witnessed the whole sordid scene. But I didn't care. The cheating liars had been exposed, and soon they'd face the consequences of their despicable actions. My quest for revenge was only just beginning. In the days following my explosive confrontation with Nolan and Ivy, I found myself surprisingly calm. The initial storm of anger and betrayal had passed, replaced by a steely determination to make them pay for what they'd done. I may have lost my husband, but I hadn't lost my self-respect. And I'd be damned if I let those two schemers just ride off into the sunset without facing any consequences. So I devised a plan, a deliciously devious scheme that would hit them where it hurt most, their reputations and their pocketbooks. First, I gathered even more evidence, documenting every instance of Nolan's misconduct that violated his company's ethics policies. The misuse of corporate resources for his dalliances with Ivy, the inappropriate relationships, the blatant lies on his expense reports to cover up their escapades. I compiled it all into a tidy file, complete with copies of those damning text messages, ready to present to his boss and the HR department. Next, I dug deeper into Ivy's background, searching for any skeletons in her closet that could be used as leverage. As it turned out, the sleazy homewrecker had quite a few secrets of her own. Like the fact that she was carrying on not just with my husband, but with another married executive at the company too. Or how about those shady business dealings with a former client that had led to a nasty lawsuit? I gathered all the sordid details and incriminating documents, preparing to leak them to the press and Ivy's unsuspecting partner at just the right moment. With everything in place, I decided to lull my prey into a false sense of security first. I started being overly friendly with Nolan again, pretending I was finally ready to forgive and move on. "Lila, I'm so sorry," he blubbered during one of our clandestine meetups at a cafe near his office. "What I did was inexcusable, but I want to make things right. I still love you." I gave him my most radiant smile, pulling his hands into mine. "I know, baby, and I love you too. That's why I'm willing to give our marriage another chance." He seemed stunned by my apparent change of heart, but too desperate and pathetic to question it. Over the next few weeks, I let him think we were working through the hurt and rebuilding our trust, all the while compiling more proof of his indiscretions behind the scenes. Ivy, for her part, seemed utterly convinced that she'd won. The smug look she shot me whenever our paths crossed said it all. Little did either of them know, I was simply luring them into my carefully laid trap. Everything was going according to plan. Finally, when I had enough ammunition to bury them both, I started planting little seeds here and there. An anonymous email to Ivy's partner with details of her affairs, a copied file mysteriously left on her boss's desk at work. At first, they brushed it off as someone's attempt at a sick joke. But slowly, the dominoes began to fall into place around them. Ivy started facing whispers and stares everywhere she went, as the news of her transgressions spread like wildfire. Clients began dropping her company left and right, the two disgusted by her unethical behavior. Nolan, meanwhile, found himself being summoned into endless meetings with HR and the executives, as each new piece of evidence against him came to light. His desperate pleas of innocence fell on increasingly deaf ears. They say the best revenge is living well. But there's also a particular satisfaction in being the architect of your enemy's downfall, watching every last piece of their lives crumble around them because of their own vile misdeeds. As Ivy and Nolan began to drown in the tsunami of consequences they'd brought upon themselves, I stood back and observed with a dark, triumphant smile. The cheating liars were getting exactly what they deserved, and it was all thanks to the deliciously devious scheme I'd executed to perfection. As the fallout from my meticulously planned revenge scheme intensified, it was almost comical to witness Ivy and Nolan's lives unraveling before their eyes. Ivy's entire world came crashing down in spectacular fashion. Word of her affairs with multiple married executives spread like wildfire, earning her a reputation as a home-wrecking pariah. Clients dropped her firm left and right, disgusted by her unethical behavior. Even her own partner wasn't spared from the shockwaves. After receiving those anonymous emails detailing Ivy's indiscretions, he promptly kicked her out and filed for divorce, leaving her with nothing. I'll never forget the look on her face when she showed up at my doorstep one evening, tears of makeup streaking her cheeks. "You did this," she choked out, hatred burning in her eyes. "You ruined everything." I simply gave her a cold, triumphant smile. "I warned you not to mess with me, Ivy. You reap what you sow." With a guttural scream of rage, she lunged at me, hands outstretched like claws, but I was ready, sidestepping her attack with ease. "Save it," I spat as she crashed against the doorframe. "You've already lost. Now get out of my sight before I call the cops." Ivy slunk away in humiliated defeat, her life in utter ruins because of her own despicable actions. Karma, as they say, is a bitch. As for Nolan, well, let's just say he didn't fare much better. Turns out his cozy tech company had a very strict no-fraternization policy that he'd blatantly violated. Strike one. Then there were all those expense reports he'd falsified to cover up his and Ivy's little rendezvous, using corporate funds for personal dalliances. Strike two. When the higher-ups received that anonymous file detailing every last instance of misconduct, ethics breach, and company policy violation, they didn't take it lightly. Strike three, you're out. Nolan was promptly fired and faced with a mountain of damning evidence that could potentially lead to legal troubles, all because he couldn't keep it in his pants. He came crawling to me one evening, a sniveling, pathetic mess desperate for my forgiveness and support. As if. "Lila, please," he blubbered, clutching the manila envelope of termination papers. "I've lost everything because of my stupid mistakes. My job, my reputation, it's all gone. You have to help me." I fixed him with a cold, steely glare, fighting back the urge to spit in his face. "The only one who has to do anything here is you," I stated flatly. "You need to sign those divorce papers and get the hell out of my life for good." Nolan's jaw dropped in stunned disbelief. But I thought we were working things out? You said you forgave me." A harsh laugh tore from my throat. "You're even dumber than you look if you actually believed that load of crap." Reaching into my purse, I pulled out a crisp folder and tossed it at his feet, the contents spilling across the floor, copies of every last text between him and Ivy, evidence of his corporate violations, you name it. "That's just a taste of all the proof I gathered while I was pretending to take you back," I said, watching realization slowly dawn over his stupid, cheating face. "Everything you've lost, your job, your money, your precious Ivy, it's all because of your own sickening behavior. I just gave you the consequences you deserved." Nolan's mouth opened and closed like a gasping fish as he processed the magnitude of what I'd done. You planned this whole thing? All of it?" I leveled him with a look of pure disdain. "You're damn right I did. I told that snake Ivy she was going to regret the day she messed with me, and I meant it. Now here we are, and you're both getting exactly what you deserve. To lose everything, just like I did when you betrayed me." With a look of utter devastation, Nolan slumped to his knees, cradling his head in his hands as racking sobs shook his body. But I felt no pity whatsoever, only a deep sense of satisfaction that karmic justice had been served. Months later, as the crisp autumn air turned to the bitter chill of winter, I could finally begin to breathe again. The deep wounds left by Nolan's betrayal were starting to heal over, leaving me stronger and more resilient than ever before. I'd moved out of our suburban home that once felt like a gilded cage into a cozy downtown apartment that was all my own. With the hefty divorce settlement and my renewed focus on work, I was building a new life for myself from the ashes of my shattered marriage. It felt incredible to stand on my own 2 feet again, no longer weighed down by the constant anxiety and heartbreak of Nolan's infidelity. I was finally free. Of course, there were still tough days when the anger and hurt would bubble back up unexpectedly. Like the morning I ran into Nolan at a cafe near my new place, I just ordered my usual soy latte when that all-too-familiar voice made me freeze. "Lila, is that you?" I turned slowly to see him sitting at a corner table, looking unbearably pathetic in a rumpled suit and day-old stubble. The light had gone out of his eyes, leaving them dull and haunted. Part of me wanted to keep walking, to pretend I hadn't seen the sad shell of a man he'd become, but another part felt compelled to face him, to confirm just how far he'd fallen from grace. "Nolan," I said flatly, clutching my coffee cup. "Fancy meeting you here." He opened his mouth as if to say something, then seemed to think better of it. An awkward silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken history. How are you doing?" he finally managed, rubbing the back of his neck anxiously. I gave a nonchalant shrug. "I'm good, actually. Really good. Teaching keeps me busy, and I've been exploring some fun hobbies in my free time." That's great, Lila. I'm happy for you." His voice was subdued, defeated. We both knew I was lying through my teeth. I was more than just good. I was thriving, flourishing in the aftermath of shedding him from my life. Nolan, on the other hand? Well, one look at his haggard face and slumped shoulders told the whole story. Losing his fancy job, his status, his money, and his mistress in one fell swoop had clearly broken something inside him. Part of me felt a pang of pity, but the rest of me remained coldly indifferent, even satisfied to see the pathetic, sniveling man he'd become. This was the price he paid for his sickening betrayal. Let it be a hard lesson etched into his bones. As I turned to leave, coffee in hand, Nolan reached out as if to stop me. "Lila, wait." His voice cracked with desperation. "I'm so sorry. For everything. You didn't deserve any of that pain I caused you. I was a stupid, selfish bastard, and I'll regret it until the day I die." I paused, letting his words hang heavy in the air between us. Once upon a time, I might have accepted that apology, might have even felt the sting of tears. But now, those useless words just rolled off me like water off a duck's back. We were far, far past the point of making amends. Fixing him with a cool, appraising stare, I simply said, "I know you are, and I truly don't care anymore, Nolan. That's the beautiful part." I left him gaping after me, mouth opening and closing like a landed fish as I strode out of the cafe with my head held high. No more tears, no more anger, just the delicious sense of closure after claiming my long overdue justice. That poisoned chapter of my life was finally, blessedly, over. And as I stepped out into the brisk morning air, breathing in the crispness of my newfound freedom, I felt an overwhelming sense of lightness washing over me. The cheating liar who'd once crushed my heart under his heel was now powerless. I'd conquered the demons of betrayal through the sweetest revenge imaginable, breaking the cycle and choosing to live well instead of being consumed by hatred. With a faint smile playing on my lips, I pressed on down the sidewalk, eagerly ready to embrace this new and infinitely brighter path laid out before me. The stale air in the living room felt suffocating as Carol's words sliced through me like a dagger. "Why don't you just admit you're a failure?" she spat, arms crossed, her icy glare piercing into my soul. Matt swiftly stepped in front of me, shielding me from his mother's venomous rage. His broad shoulders tensed, a physical barrier against the torrent of cruelty that had become all too familiar. "That's enough, Mom," he said, his voice low but firm. "We've barely set our bags down, and you're already starting this again." Carol's lips curled into a snarl. "Well, it's the truth, isn't it? My son deserves better than a barren wife who can't even give me grandchildren." The words stung like acid, but I remained silent, biting my lip to hold back the tears threatening to spill. This was our life now, a constant battle against Carol's relentless verbal assaults and manipulations. Matt's hand found mine, squeezing it reassuringly. "We're not having this discussion again. Julia is my wife, and I love her. That's all that matters." Carol threw her hands up in exasperation. "Fine, keep living in denial, but don't come crying to me when you realize the mistake you've made." With that, she stormed off, leaving a tense silence in her wake. I let out a shaky breath, leaning into Matt's embrace. "I'm so sorry," he murmured, his warm breath tickling my ear. "I never should have agreed to stay here." Pulling back, I mustered a weak smile. "It's not your fault. We had no idea it would be this bad." Matt's brow furrowed, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. "We can't keep living like this, Julia. It's not healthy for either of us." I nodded, my heart heavy with the realization that our once peaceful lives had been shattered by the toxic presence of a woman who was supposed to be family. But in that moment, I knew we had to find a way out, for our own sanity and the future we so desperately craved. As I lay awake that night, my mind drifted back to the winding roads that had led me here, a world away from the small Kansas town where I was raised. Growing up, I had always dreamed of escaping the confines of that rural life, yearning for the excitement and opportunities that big cities promised. It was that desire that propelled me through college, studying economics with a laser-focused determination. And when I landed a job as an accounting clerk in San Francisco, fresh out of university, it felt like the first step toward my new life. The city was everything I had imagined and more, a vibrant, pulsing hub of culture, ambition, and endless possibilities. It was there that I met Matt, a kind-hearted city native who worked in the planning department. From our first date, there was an undeniable connection, a spark that transcended our vastly different backgrounds. Matt was charmed by my small-town roots, finding a refreshing innocence in my wide-eyed wonder at the big city, and I was captivated by his confidence, his worldliness, and the way he effortlessly navigated the fast-paced urban landscape. It didn't take long for us to fall deeply in love, and when Matt proposed, I said yes without hesitation. I was ready to start this new chapter of my life, blissfully unaware of the storm that was brewing on the horizon. At first, Carol seemed warm and welcoming, embracing me with open arms as the daughter-in-law she had always wanted, but that facade quickly crumbled once the subject of children came up. "So, when can I expect some grandkids?" she would ask, a glint of determination in her eyes that made me shift uncomfortably. Matt would brush it off with a nervous chuckle, but I could sense the mounting tension each time the topic arose. It was as if Carol viewed my sole purpose as being a vessel for her grandchildren, and my inability to conceive immediately raised her suspicions. The comments became more frequent, more pointed, until they evolved into outright accusations. "You're not getting any younger, you know," Carol would remark, her words laced with venom. "The clock is ticking." I tried my best to ignore her jabs, pouring my energy into my job and my marriage. But with each passing year, Carol's grip tightened, her manipulation growing more insidious. The nightmare truly began when Carol faked an injury, forcing Matt and me to move in with her to help with her recovery. At first, we rationalized it as a temporary situation, a few weeks, maybe a month or two at most. But those weeks soon stretched into years, and Carol's true colors emerged in full force. "I don't know why you're wasting your time with that job," she would sneer as I got ready for work each morning. "You should be focusing on having babies, not crunching numbers." Her words cut deep, but I tried to brush them off, reminding myself that she was just a bitter, lonely woman lashing out. Matt did his best to shield me from the worst of her attacks, but Carol was relentless. She would slip fertility clinic pamphlets into my bag when I wasn't looking, or leave them strategically placed around the house. "Just in case you change your mind," she would say with a sickly sweet smile that made my skin crawl. The emotional toll was immense. I found myself constantly on edge, dreading each interaction with Carol, yet powerless to escape her clutches. My once thriving career began to suffer as the stress and anxiety took their toll, and even my relationship with Matt started to strain under the weight of it all. "Maybe we should just leave," I suggested one night, my voice thick with emotion. "This is too much, Matt. I can't take it anymore." He pulled me close, his strong arms providing a temporary refuge from the storm. "I know, baby, but where would we go? We can't afford our own place right now." It was a harsh reality, one that left me feeling trapped and hopeless. Carol had us right where she wanted us, and she reveled in our misery. "You know, if you really loved my son, you'd give him what he wants," she would say, her words dripping with malice. "But I guess you're just too selfish for that." Each barb felt like a dagger to my heart, and I found myself questioning my own worth. Was I really failing Matt by not being able to have children? Did he resent me for it, deep down? But whenever I voiced these fears, he was quick to reassure me. "Don't listen to her, Julia. You're everything to me, and I love you just the way you are." Still, the doubt lingered, fueled by Carol's relentless campaign of psychological torture. It was a vicious cycle that seemed to have no end in sight. I stepped through the front door, my shoulders slumped from another long day at the office. The familiar scent of home greeted me, but something felt off. An eerie silence hung in the air, and as I made my way down the hallway, a knot began to form in the pit of my stomach. When I reached our bedroom door, my heart dropped. The room was completely bare. No furniture, no decor, not a single personal item in sight. Just 4 empty walls staring back at me. "Matt?" I called out, my voice trembling. "What's going on?" He appeared in the doorway, his face pale and eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. Without a word, he brushed past me and began frantically searching the other rooms. I followed close behind, my heart pounding in my chest as the truth slowly sank in. Room by room, we found the same scene, our belongings stripped away, leaving nothing but hollow spaces. Finally, we made our way to the living room, where the source of this nightmare was waiting for us. Carol sat smugly on the couch, surrounded by trash bags overflowing with our possessions. "Looking for something?" she sneered, her lips curled into a sickening grin. Matt's hands balled into fists at his sides. "What the hell have you done, Mom?" Carol rose to her feet, her eyes boring into me with a hatred I had never witnessed before. "I'm just doing what any good mother would do, protecting her son from a worthless wife who can't give him children." The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but I found myself paralyzed by the sheer cruelty of her actions. Matt stepped forward, positioning himself between Carol and me. "You're out of your mind." He spat. "This is too far, even for you." Carol's laughter was like nails on a chalkboard. "Oh, please, don't act so surprised. You knew this was coming," She's never going to be good enough for you, and it's time you opened your eyes to that fact. With a swift motion, she grabbed a trash bag and hurled it at Matt's feet, its contents spilling out in a jumbled heap. My clothes, my books, my most cherished mementos. "Get out of my house," she snarled, her eyes burning with a fury I had never seen before. "Both of you, and don't come crawling back until you've come to your senses." In that moment, everything became crystal clear. This was no longer just a battle of words or a clash of wills. Carol had crossed a line, and there was no going back. As I gathered what little I could into my arms, I felt Matt's hand slip into mine, a silent reminder that we were in this together. We may have lost our possessions, but we still had each other, and that was something Carol could never take away. With our meager belongings stuffed into a couple of suitcases, Matt and I fled to the safety of a hotel room, our sanctuary from Carol's wrath. As the door clicked shut behind us, I finally allowed the tears I had been holding back to flow freely. "I'm so sorry," Matt whispered, pulling me into his embrace. "This is all my fault. I should have protected you from her." I shook my head, burying my face in the crook of his neck. "No, this isn't your fault. Your mother. She's gone too far this time." We stood there, clinging to each other as the weight of what had happened slowly sank in. Carol had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and in that moment I knew our lives would never be the same. After what felt like an eternity, we finally broke apart, and I sank onto the edge of the bed, my body and spirit drained. Matt sat beside me, his arm wrapped around my shoulders, providing the strength I so desperately needed. "Julia," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I need you to know something. No matter what happens, no matter what my mother says or does, you are everything to me. You're my world, and I wouldn't change a single thing about you." His words were like a balm to my wounded soul, and I found myself falling in love with him all over again. This man, who had stood by me through the worst of his mother's cruelty, still saw me as the most precious thing in his life. "I love you too," I whispered, my fingers intertwining with his. "And I promise we'll get through this together." It was in that moment of vulnerability and connection that I felt a flutter deep within me, a subtle reminder of the life we had created together. A life that Carol knew nothing about, a secret gift that had blossomed despite her best efforts to destroy us. As if sensing my realization, Matt's eyes widened, his gaze dropping to my stomach. "Julia, are you—" I nodded, a tremulous smile spreading across my face. "I just found out a few days ago. I was waiting for the right time to tell you." Matt's expression shifted from shock to pure unbridled joy as he cupped my face in his hands, planting a tender kiss on my forehead. "This changes everything," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. And in that moment, a plan began to take shape, a way for us to start anew, free from Carol's toxic influence. We would fake a divorce, change our names, and disappear from her life completely. No more manipulation, no more cruelty, just the two of us and our precious little one, embarking on a fresh start filled with love and hope. As I drifted off to sleep that night, cradled in Matt's arms, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. Carol may have tried to break us, but in the end, she had only made us stronger, more resilient, and more determined than ever to build the life we deserved. With a sense of determination fueling our every move, Matt and I set our plan into motion. We knew it was the only way to truly escape Carol's toxic grasp and start fresh. First, we filed for divorce, a heartbreaking formality, but a necessary step in severing our ties to our old lives. The legal paperwork was a mere technicality, a smokescreen to conceal our true intentions from Carol. Next, we changed our names. No longer would I be Julia, the woman Carol had tormented and belittled. I became Emily, a new identity unburdened by the past. And Matt shed his old self, emerging as Michael, a man reborn, ready to embrace the future we were crafting together. Every detail was meticulously planned, from establishing new email accounts and social media profiles to obtaining fresh identification documents. We left no stone unturned, ensuring that Carol would have no way to track us down once we disappeared. With our new identities in place, we began the search for a new home, a sanctuary where we could raise our child in peace, far away from Carol's poisonous influence. It wasn't an easy task, but eventually we found the perfect little house in a quiet neighborhood, a world away from the chaos we had left behind. As we unpacked our belongings in our new home, a sense of liberation washed over me. This was a fresh start, a clean slate where we could write our own story, free from the shackles of the past. "I can't believe we're finally here," I murmured, running my hand over the swell of my growing belly. Michael smiled, his eyes shining with a happiness I hadn't seen in far too long. "Believe it, Emily. This is just the beginning." In those early days, we lived in a state of constant vigilance, ever watchful for any sign that Carol had caught wind of our whereabouts. We knew that if she ever discovered our ruse, she would stop at nothing to track us down and reclaim her twisted sense of control. But as the months passed and our little one grew stronger within me, our fears began to subside. We had successfully slipped through Carol's grasp, vanishing without a trace. With each kick and flutter, our determination to build a life free from her toxicity only grew stronger. We poured our hearts into creating a nurturing environment for our child, filling our home with love, laughter, and all the joy that Carol had so desperately tried to deny us. And when the day finally came, and our beautiful son entered the world, we knew that every sacrifice, every hardship had been worth it. Cradling him in our arms, we made a silent vow. Nathan would never know the pain and torment we had endured. He would grow up surrounded by unconditional love, cherished and protected from the cruelty that had once threatened to consume us. As I gazed into his innocent eyes, I knew that our journey had only just begun. But this time, we were the authors of our own story, and nothing, not even Carol's darkest machinations, could ever tear us apart again. The holidays had always been a bittersweet time for me, a reminder of the family I had lost when we cut ties with Carol. But that year, as Michael and I sat by the twinkling lights of our Christmas tree, our little Nathan babbling happily in my arms, I felt a sense of peace and contentment I hadn't known in years. We had built a life beyond our wildest dreams, a safe haven where love and laughter reigned supreme. Carol was little more than a distant memory, a specter from the past that no longer held any power over us, or so we thought. It was a few days after Christmas when the fateful envelope arrived, its nondescript appearance giving no hint of the bombshell it contained. Michael slid it open with a casual flick of his finger, and that's when our world came crashing down around us. Inside was a simple Christmas card, but the image it bore was enough to steal the breath from our lungs. There we were, smiling radiantly, our new names emblazoned beneath our faces, Emily and Michael. And cradled between us the precious bundle that had given our lives new meaning, our son Nathan. "How?" I choked out, my hands trembling as I clutched the damning evidence. "How could she have found us?" Michael's face had drained of all color, his expression a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. "I don't know," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "but she knows everything." In that moment, the illusion of safety we had so carefully constructed shattered like fragile glass. Carol had found us, and with that simple act, she had reclaimed the power to torment us, to disrupt the sanctuary we had built. The phone rang, its shrill tone piercing the oppressive silence that had fallen over our home. Michael answered with a terse greeting, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscles rippling beneath his skin. "Hello, dear." Carol's sickly sweet voice crackled through the speaker, laced with a smugness that made my blood run cold. "Did you like my little surprise?" Michael's knuckles whitened as he gripped the phone, his entire body rigid with barely contained fury. "How did you find us?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. Carol's laughter was like nails on a chalkboard. "Oh, please. Did you really think you could hide from me forever? I'm your mother, Michael. I know you better than anyone." The vitriol spewed forth, a torrent of accusations and recriminations that laid bare the depths of Carol's depravity. She spared no detail, flaunting her deceptions and thefts as if they were badges of honor. With each poisonous word, I felt my resolve hardening, my love for Michael and our son burning brighter than ever before. This was our life, our family, and no twisted, bitter woman would ever be allowed to taint it again. When Michael finally found his voice, it was laced with a steely determination that sent a chill down my spine. "Listen to me, and listen closely," he growled. "You are never to contact us again. You are never to come near us or our son. As of this moment, you are dead to me. Do you understand?" Carol's response was a shriek of outrage, but Michael had already ended the call, slamming the phone down with a finality that reverberated through the room. As he gathered me in his arms, I knew that this was the end. The true, final severing of the toxic bond that had plagued us for far too long. Carol's machinations had failed, her cruelty ultimately serving only to strengthen the love and resilience that bound our little family together. From that day forth, we vowed to live our lives on our own terms, unburdened by the weight of the past. Nathan would grow up cherished and adored, never knowing the darkness that had once threatened to consume us. And as for Carol, well, let's just say that karma has a way of evening the scales, a lesson she would soon learn in the most brutal of ways. The years that followed were a whirlwind of joy and growth, as Michael and I savored every moment of raising our precious Nathan. With Carol's toxic presence firmly in the rearview mirror, we were finally able to breathe freely, basking in the warmth of our little family. Of course, the news of her grandchild's existence had hit Carol hard, a harsh karmic retribution for all the pain and anguish she had inflicted upon us. But we refused to let her bitterness and resentment cast a shadow over our happiness. Instead, we focused our energies on building the life we had always dreamed of. Michael's hard work and dedication paid off with a well-deserved promotion, allowing us to move into a spacious home with a lush backyard where Nathan could run and play to his heart's content. As for me, I finally found the courage to pursue my own professional ambitions, enrolling in night classes to earn a degree in accounting. It was a grueling schedule, juggling motherhood and studies, but Michael was my rock, supporting me every step of the way. On the rare occasions when doubt crept in, whispering insidious thoughts of inadequacy, I would look into Nathan's adoring eyes and find the strength to push forward. He was my inspiration, my constant reminder of the love and resilience that had carried us through our darkest days. And then, one crisp autumn day, a letter arrived, an invitation to my parents' house for a long-overdue family reunion. My heart swelled with a mix of joy and trepidation as I realized how long it had been since I had seen the people who had once been my whole world. Michael must have sensed my apprehension, for he pulled me close, pressing a tender kiss to my forehead. "It'll be okay," he murmured. "They're your family, Emily. They love you." With his reassurance bolstering my courage, we packed our bags and set off on the long journey back to Kansas. Nathan practically vibrating with excitement at the prospect of meeting his grandparents for the first time. The moment we stepped through the door of my childhood home, it was as if no time had passed at all. My parents swept us into their warm embrace, tears of joy streaming down their faces as they marveled at the beautiful little boy clutching my hand. "Oh, Julia, Emily," my mother corrected herself, her eyes shining with love and acceptance. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart. You've built an amazing life for yourself." My father nodded, his weathered features creased with a broad smile. "And this little guy," he added, ruffling Nathan's hair, "he's one lucky kid to have parents like you two." In that moment, surrounded by the unconditional love and support of my family, I knew that we had truly won. Carol's cruelty had not broken us. Instead, it had forged us into an unbreakable unit, a fortress of love and resilience that no force on earth could ever penetrate. As the days slipped by, in a haze of laughter, reminiscing, and gleeful chaos courtesy of Nathan's boundless energy, I found myself reflecting on the long, winding road that had brought us to this point. The struggles, the heartache, the moments when we had teetered on the brink of despair, all of it had been worth it for the sheer bliss of being surrounded by those who loved us. Flaws and all. And as for Carol, well, let's just say that karma had a way of evening the scales. After a health scare left her dependent on distant relatives who resented her very presence, she found herself utterly alone, a bitter, withered husk of a woman reaping the consequences of her own cruelty. But that was a fate I refused to dwell on, for it held no power over me anymore. My focus was solely on the future, a future brimming with love, laughter, and the promise of endless joy, all thanks to the incredible man by my side and the miraculous child we had brought into this world against all odds. As I watched Michael chase Nathan through the backyard, their peals of laughter ringing out like music, I knew that we had truly won. Carol's hatred had been vanquished by the power of our love, and nothing, not even the darkest of pasts, could ever dim the radiant future that stretched out before us. The package looked harmless enough, just an ordinary cardboard box wrapped in brown paper. Yet, as I peeled away the layers to reveal a worn baby blanket, a strange odor wafted up, striking me with an eerie chill. This wasn't the comforting scent of lavender and age I associated with Nana's keepsakes. "Jessie, why does this blanket reek of death?" Emma's high-pitched voice shattered the silence, her innocent question slicing through me like a knife. I froze, the coarse fabric clutched in my trembling hands as Mark entered the living room, his face draining of color. "What are you talking about, Mom?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. Wordlessly, I held up the blanket, letting the putrid smell speak for itself. Mark's eyes widened in recognition, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. "That's not from Nana," he murmured, his voice strained. "It's from my mother." Of course. Patricia's menacing specter loomed over us once again, her twisted games infiltrating our sanctuary. I should have known better than to open that cursed package without Mark by my side. Emma tugged at my sleeve, her hazel eyes round with worry. "Why would Grandma send us something smelly, Mommy? That's not very nice." "It's not about being nice, sweetie," I managed, forcing a reassuring smile for her sake. "Grandma just has a different way of doing things, that's all." Mark sank onto the couch, cradling his head in his hands. I longed to comfort him, but the chasm between us seemed to widen with each new torment Patricia inflicted. As I clutched the offending blanket, a memory resurfaced. That first fateful meeting with my mother-in-law, her icy gaze piercing through me like I was already a ghost. If only I'd heeded the warning signs then, perhaps we could have avoided this toxic entanglement. But it was too late for regrets. Patricia had snared us in her web, and there was no escaping the inescapable truth. Her malice knew no bounds, and we were merely pawns in her twisted game. The first time I met Patricia, she looked through me as if I were a ghost. Mark had warned me about her frosty demeanor, but nothing could have prepared me for the utter disdain etched onto her features. It was our engagement party, a joyous occasion meant to celebrate the union of two families. Yet the moment we stepped into Patricia's immaculate living room, the atmosphere shifted, a palpable chill descending upon us. "So, this is the girl who's ensnared my son?" Patricia drawled, her eyes raking over me with undisguised contempt. "I must admit, Mark, I expected someone more." Mark tensed beside me, his grip on my hand tightening. "Mom, please, this is supposed to be a happy day." Patricia arched a perfectly groomed brow. "Happy? For whom exactly? Certainly not for a mother watching her only child make the biggest mistake of his life." The words hung in the air like a noxious cloud, stealing my breath away. I opened my mouth to respond, but Mark beat me to it. "That's enough, Mother." His voice was low, edged with a rare hardness. "If you can't be civil, we'll leave." For a fleeting moment, Patricia's mask slipped, revealing a flash of something akin to panic, but it vanished just as quickly, replaced by her trademark sneer. "Oh, very well." She waved a dismissive hand. "I'll play the gracious hostess, if only to avoid another tedious scene." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced pleasantries and thinly veiled barbs. Patricia made no effort to hide her disdain, criticizing everything from my choice of attire to my family's wealth. "It must be nice, having Daddy's money to fall back on," she remarked at one point, her lips curled into a mocking smile. "Some of us had to work for a living, you know." I bit my tongue, determined not to rise to her bait, but with each cutting remark, I began to see the true depth of Patricia's animosity, and the lengths she would go to make my life a living hell. As we finally escaped into the cool night air, Mark pulled me into a fierce embrace. "I'm so sorry, Jess. I had no idea she'd be that vile." I forced a brave smile, even as the weight of Patricia's hatred settled heavily upon my shoulders. "It's okay. We knew she wouldn't make this easy." But deep down, a seed of doubt had taken root, whispering that this was only the beginning, and that Patricia's wrath would someday consume us all. In-laws can be challenging, but Patricia was something else entirely. No matter how hard I tried to extend an olive branch, she seemed determined to sever any chance of a healthy relationship. It was Mark's father, Robert, who finally suggested a solution, one that left a bitter taste in my mouth. Just give her what she wants, he said during one of our rare coffee meetings, his voice hushed as if afraid Patricia might overhear. A little financial incentive, and she'll come around. I stared at him, incredulous. You want me to bribe your wife? Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat. It's not a bribe, per se, just a gesture of goodwill from your family. Patricia's always felt insecure about not coming from money. So you're saying I should throw cash at her until she stops treating me like garbage? The words tumbled out before I could stop them, acidic with years of pent-up frustration. Robert's face reddened, and for a moment, I thought he might actually stand up for himself, or for me. But then his shoulders slumped, defeat etched into every line of his weathered face. Please, Jessie, just try it, for Mark's sake, if nothing else. I wanted to refuse, to tell Robert where he could shove his goodwill gesture. But then I pictured Mark's weary expression, the toll Patricia's hatred was taking on our once blissful marriage. Could a little bribery really be the answer? In the end, I agreed, if only to keep the peace. Patricia's demands started small at first, a new designer handbag here, a lavish spa weekend there, but it didn't take long for the requests to escalate, each one more outrageous than the last. A little birdie told me your father's firm just landed a major contract, she purred during one of her unannounced visits, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the table. Surely you could spare a few thousand for a much-needed kitchen renovation? I bristled at the casual way she referenced my family's finances, as if we were an open well for her to draw from at will. But I kept my expression carefully neutral, unwilling to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Of course, Patricia, whatever you need. Her smile was saccharine, laced with the unmistakable tang of victory. Excellent. I knew you'd see reason, dear. As she swept out of the house, leaving a cloud of expensive perfume in her wake, I couldn't shake the sinking feeling that I'd just made a deal with the devil herself. And this was only the beginning. You'll take Nana to her appointments now, Patricia announced one day, her tone leaving no room for argument. I stared at her, bewildered. What? But I thought you had hired a nurse to take care of her needs. Patricia waved a dismissive hand. That was only temporary. Nana prefers family, and you're not doing anything important these days anyway. The jab stung, but I bit my tongue. After years of tolerating Patricia's barbs, I had grown adept at swallowing my pride. Of course, I forced myself to say. Whatever Nana needs. And so it began, a relentless cycle of doctor visits, physical therapy sessions, and endless spent tending to Mark's ailing grandmother. Nana was a sweet woman, but her care was exhausting, especially with a rambunctious 6-year-old and a newborn baby at home. Still, I soldiered on, determined to prove my worth to Patricia, even as she piled on more and more demands. The nursing home isn't cutting it anymore, she declared one afternoon, sweeping into my living room uninvited. Nana needs to move in with us until she's back on her feet. I stared at her, aghast. But we don't have room for her here. And what about the round-the-clock care she needs? Patricia fixed me with a withering look. Well, you'll just have to make room, won't you? Unless, of course, you'd prefer to put her in one of those dreadful state-run facilities. The implication hung in the air, heavy and damning. I knew what Patricia was really saying. If I refused, I would be the one responsible for Nana's suffering. So, like always, I acquiesced, rearranging our entire lives to accommodate Nana's needs. The once peaceful sanctuary of our home was transformed into a makeshift hospital, with medical equipment and the ever-present scent of antiseptic. Through it all, Patricia watched with a critical eye, finding fault in every aspect of Nana's care. You're not doing the exercises properly, she would snap, shoving me aside to demonstrate the correct technique. No wonder she's not improving. Or, did you even bother to check her vitals this morning? You're lucky she's still alive with your level of incompetence. The insults cut deep, but I couldn't bring myself to retaliate, not when Nana's well-being was at stake. So I simply gritted my teeth and carried on, pouring every ounce of my energy into ensuring Nana wanted for nothing, until one day when the strain of it all finally became too much to bear. Mommy, the baby in your tummy told me he's scared. Emma's words froze me in my tracks. My hand instinctively went to my still flat stomach as dread washed over me. What did you say, honey? Emma blinked up at me with those unnervingly perceptive eyes of hers. The baby. He says he doesn't want to come out yet because Grandma Patricia is being mean. My heart stuttered in my chest. How could she possibly know? Mark and I hadn't even confirmed the pregnancy yet. Emma, sweetie, what are you talking about? I forced a casual laugh, even as my mind raced. There's no baby in Mommy's tummy. But even as the words left my lips, I knew it was a lie. The queasiness, the fatigue, the subtle shifts in my body, all the signs had been there, staring me in the face. I had just been too preoccupied with appeasing Patricia to acknowledge them. Emma frowned, her little brow furrowing. But I heard him, Mommy. He's scared of Grandma. A lump formed in my throat. Of course the baby would be afraid. He could likely sense the tension, the constant strain that had become our daily reality, thanks to Patricia's toxicity. That evening, after putting Emma to bed, I forced myself to take the test. As the twin pink lines appeared, a mixture of joy and trepidation washed over me. A new life, a precious gift, and another pawn in Patricia's twisted games. The doctor's stark words only confirmed my fears. You'll need to take it easy over the next few months, she cautioned. This pregnancy is considered high risk due to your age and the stress factors. I nodded numbly, already imagining Patricia's snide remarks about my geriatric condition. As if I didn't have enough on my plate caring for Nana and managing her ever-escalating demands. Sure enough, when I finally broke the news, Patricia's reaction was everything I had dreaded, and more. Another mouth to feed? She clucked her tongue disapprovingly. I should have known you'd find a way to burden us further. The words were like a physical blow, stealing my breath. But before I could muster a response, she was already sweeping towards the door, tossing one final barb over her shoulder. Well, I certainly hope you're not expecting a handout from me. You've drained enough resources as it is. I watched her go, my fists clenched at my sides, as a wave of impotent rage washed over me. In that moment, I knew something had to give, because if I didn't find a way to escape Patricia's toxic orbit, this baby wouldn't be the only one in danger. Mommy, Patricia took Nana's special necklace. I saw her. Emma's words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, willing myself to remain calm even as my heart raced. What do you mean, sweetie? Are you sure about this? Emma nodded solemnly. I saw her take it from Nana's room when she thought no one was looking. A sickening realization dawned on me. Of course, the vintage emerald pendant Nana had treasured for decades, passed down through generations. She had intended to leave it to me as the only daughter-in-law. But not if Patricia had her way. Gritting my teeth, I forced a reassuring smile for Emma's sake. It's okay, honey. Why don't you go play in your room for a bit? Mommy needs to make a call. Once Emma was out of earshot, I dialed Mark's number with shaking fingers. He had to know what his mother was up to. The woman had truly stooped to a new low. Mark's voice was laced with concern when he answered. Jess, what's wrong? Is it the baby? No, it's your mother. The words tumbled out in a rush. Emma saw her take Nana's necklace from her room. There was a heavy silence, then a weary sigh. Are you sure Emma saw correctly? You know how kids can misinterpret things. She was adamant, Mark. And when have you ever known Emma to lie? I fought to keep my voice steady. Your mother has been angling for that necklace for years. We both know it. Another pause, then. All right, let me talk to her. We'll get to the bottom of this. But even as I waited for Mark to return from confronting his mother, I knew deep down that it was futile. Patricia's web of lies and manipulation had only grown thicker over the years, ensnaring us all. Sure enough, when Mark finally emerged, his expression was grim. She denied everything, of course, and she's threatening to sue us for defamation if we pursue this any further. White-hot rage coursed through me. She can't just get away with this. That necklace was meant for our family. Mark held up a placating hand. I know, but we can't accuse her without proof, Jess. You know how crafty she can be. That's when it hit me, the security camera my neighbor had recently installed with a perfect view of Nana's bedroom window. If Patricia had swiped that necklace, there would be footage. Mark must have seen the resolve in my eyes because he shook his head vehemently. No, Jess. Don't even think about it. You know how vindictive she can be if she feels backed into a corner. But I was already moving, propelled by a newfound sense of determination. Enough was enough. It was time to strip away Patricia's carefully constructed facade once and for all, no matter the cost. How could you, Mom? You have no idea what you've unleashed." Mark's words sliced through the tense silence, his voice trembling with a rare fury. We stood in the lawyer's office, the damning evidence of Patricia's misdeeds laid bare before us. The security footage had been merely the tip of the iceberg. Once we started digging, a trail of deceit and embezzlement had unraveled, implicating Patricia in a tangled web of financial crimes spanning decades. Letters and documents bombarded us from all sides, demands for repayment, legal threats, even whispers of criminal charges. All this time, while we had been bowing to her every whim, Patricia had been systematically draining Nana's estate, lining her own pockets without a shred of remorse. And now, finally confronted with the truth, she had nowhere left to hide. Patricia lifted her chin defiantly, her icy gaze sweeping over us with undisguised contempt. "Don't act so righteous, Mark. You're just as complicit in all of this." Mark recoiled as if struck. "What are you talking about? I had no idea." "Oh, please." Patricia's lip curled into a sneer. "You think I could have pulled off this level of theft without your help? All those favors I asked for over the years, the endless financial bleeding, you enabled every bit of it." Her words hung heavy in the air, poisonous barbs aimed straight at my husband's heart. To my horror, Mark's shoulders slumped, his eyes clouding with shame. I didn't realize," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to keep the peace, to make you happy." A bitter laugh erupted from Patricia's throat, harsh and mocking. "Happy? Is that what you think this was about?" She shook her head slowly, almost pityingly. "You're more of a fool than I ever gave you credit for, son." With a sinking feeling, I realized the true depths of her depravity. This had never been about money or status or any of the shallow trappings she had used to justify her cruelty. No, this was about raw, unbridled malice, an insatiable hunger to demean and destroy anyone who dared cross her path, including her own flesh and blood. "You're a monster," I spat, the words ripped from my very soul. "How could you do this to your own family?" For the briefest of moments something flickered in Patricia's eyes, a glimmer of vulnerability, a fleeting glimpse of the wounded creature lurking beneath that steely exterior. But then it was gone, swallowed up by the vast, yawning chasm of her hatred. "Family?" she scoffed. "You have no idea what that word even means." With a dismissive flick of her wrist, she turned on her heel and strode towards the door, leaving a deafening silence in her wake. We could do nothing but watch, stunned into immobility, as the true architect of our suffering slipped through our fingers once more. But this time, something had shifted. A line had been crossed, irrevocably severing whatever twisted bonds still tethered us to this vile woman. As the weight of her betrayal threatened to crush us, a new resolve took root. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Patricia's health declined rapidly after her secrets did. It was as if her body, having harbored so much darkness for so long, could no longer contain the poison she had allowed to fester. At first, the changes were subtle, a persistent cough, a gaunt pallor, the occasional tremor in her hands. But soon they became impossible to ignore or dismiss as mere side effects of aging. "She's not well," Mark confided in me one evening, his voice heavy with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Concern? Regret? "The doctors can't seem to find a cause." I said nothing, watching the flicker of flames in the fireplace as an uneasy silence stretched between us. A part of me, the wounded, vengeful part that Patricia had nurtured through years of torment, felt a grim sense of satisfaction at her deterioration. This was justice, was it not? A fitting punishment for her litany of sins? And yet, another part of me recoiled from such thoughts, sickened by the realization that I had allowed this woman's toxic influence to seep into the very core of my being. "Do you think—" Mark began, then trailed off, seemingly unable to voice the notion that had taken root in both our minds. That Patricia's affliction was not purely physical, but a manifestation of something deeper. A sickness of the soul, wrought by her own hand. In the weeks that followed, Patricia's condition only worsened, each day stripping away another layer of her former self. The haughty, immaculate woman who had once struck terror into our hearts grew frail and disheveled, her piercing gaze dulled by a perpetual fog of confusion. It should have been a victory, seeing the once formidable matriarch laid so low. But as word of her deterioration spread through the community like wildfire, a disturbing shift took place. The tongues that had once whispered in fearful reverence of Patricia now wagged with open disdain, reveling in her downfall with undisguised glee. Everywhere we went, the stares and snide remarks followed, a silent chorus of schadenfreude that chilled me to the bone. Had our small town always harbored such cruelty, such pettiness, lurking just beneath the surface? Or had Patricia's brand of toxic malice simply given them permission to unleash their own baser natures? Either way, the effect on Mark was devastating. His already fragile relationship with his mother, fractured beyond repair by her betrayal, now hung by a gossamer thread. Each new humiliation, each barbed comment seemed to chip away at what little remained of his connection to the woman who had given him life. Until finally, on a crisp autumn evening, the last thread snapped. "We have to go," he said abruptly, startling me from my reverie by the fire. "Get the kids ready. We're leaving town for a while." I opened my mouth to protest, but the look in his eyes stopped me cold. There was a hunted quality to them that I had never seen before, a desperation born of too many wounds, too much suffering. So I did as he asked, gathering our meager belongings and bundling Emma and Jamie into the car without a word. And as we pulled away from the house that had once been our sanctuary, leaving Patricia and all her toxic legacy behind, a profound sense of peace washed over me. It was over. The cycle was broken, the tendrils of her hatred no longer able to reach us. Or so I thought. "Babe, I've been thinking about going back to school once Mila starts kindergarten." I couldn't contain my excitement as I shared my dream with Ethan over dinner. His fork paused midway to his mouth, and he raised an eyebrow. "Really? And who's going to take care of Mila and the house while you're off playing student?" His condescending tone cut through me like a knife. "I thought we could work together to make it happen. You know how much this means to me." I tried to keep my voice steady, but the disappointment was palpable. Ethan scoffed. "Come on, Zara. You're a wife and mother now. It's time to grow up and focus on your real responsibilities." He resumed eating, dismissing my aspirations with a wave of his hand. Anger bubbled up inside me. Real responsibilities? Like supporting my husband's career while putting my own dreams on hold? I pushed my plate away, appetite vanishing. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "I provide for this family. The least you can do is be grateful and take care of things at home." "Grateful?" I laughed bitterly. "For what? For being treated like a servant in my own home?" Mila, sensing the tension, whimpered softly. I reached over to soothe her, but Ethan's voice stopped me cold. "Don't coddle her. She needs to learn that life isn't always fair." I stared at him in disbelief. "She's 4, Ethan. She needs love and support, not life lessons from a man who can't even appreciate his own wife." Ethan slammed his fist on the table, causing Mila to jump. "Watch your mouth, Zara. You're treading on thin ice." I stood up abruptly, scooping Mila into my arms. "I'm done with this conversation, and I'm done letting you control my life." I stormed out of the room, fighting back tears as Mila clung to me. Over the next few weeks, the tension in our home was palpable. Ethan's work trips became more frequent, leaving me alone to care for Mila and manage the household. I poured my frustrations into researching master's programs, determined to pursue my education despite Ethan's objections. One afternoon, while organizing Ethan's home office, I stumbled upon a hidden folder tucked away in his desk drawer. My hands trembled as I flipped it open, revealing divorce papers and intimate photos of Ethan with a younger woman. The world around me spun as the realization of his betrayal sank in. Rage consumed me, burning away the last shreds of love and respect I had for my husband. How could he do this to me, to our family? I clutched the evidence to my chest, tears streaming down my face. In that moment, I made a vow to myself. I would expose Ethan's true colors and make him pay for his deceit. As I sat on the floor of his office, surrounded by the remnants of our shattered marriage, a fierce determination took hold of me. I would no longer be the naive, submissive wife. It was time to take control of my life and secure a better future for Mila and myself, even if it meant destroying the man I once loved. With trembling hands, I tucked the incriminating evidence back into the folder, my mind reeling from the discovery of Ethan's betrayal. I knew I had to act quickly, but I needed more information. I couldn't confront him without a solid plan in place. I called my best friend Lila and poured out my heart to her. She listened patiently, her voice filled with a mix of anger and concern. "Zara, you need to protect yourself and Mila. You can't let him get away with this." "I know," I sighed, "but I don't even know where to start. I feel so lost." Lila's voice turned determined. "I have a friend who's a private investigator. He's discreet and thorough. I'll set up a meeting for you." 2 days later, I found myself sitting across from Jack, a seasoned PI with a no-nonsense demeanor. I handed him the folder, my voice shaking as I explained my situation. He leafed through the contents, his expression grim. "I'll dig into this Jade character and see what I can find. In the meantime, I suggest you start gathering more evidence. The more ammunition you have, the better." I nodded, a plan forming in my mind. "I have an idea. I'll need your help to execute it." That evening, while Ethan was on another work trip, I carefully planted a hidden camera in his office. It was a risk, but I needed concrete proof of his affair and any other illegal activities. Days turned into weeks as I waited for Jack's report, the camera silently recording Ethan's every move. When Jack finally called, his voice was filled with a mixture of disgust and satisfaction. "Zara, I've got what you need. Ethan's been embezzling company funds to finance his little getaways with Jade, and I've got video evidence of them in his office, discussing their plans to run away together." My heart raced as I processed the information. "Send me everything you have. It's time to confront him." Ethan returned home that evening, his demeanor cold and distant. I waited until Mila was asleep before I approached him in his office. He looked up from his laptop. Annoyance etched on his face. "What do you want, Zara?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation. "I know about Jade, Ethan, and I know about the money you've been stealing from your company." His eyes widened, then narrowed in anger. "You've been spying on me? How dare you?" I held up my phone, the video of him and Jade playing silently on the screen. "I have all the evidence I need. Did you really think you could get away with this?" Ethan's face contorted with rage. He stood up abruptly, his chair crashing to the floor. "You stupid bitch! You have no idea what you're messing with!" He lunged at me, his hands reaching for my throat. I stumbled backward, my back slamming against the wall. Mila, awakened by the commotion, appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear. "Mommy?" Ethan froze, his grip loosening. I pushed him away, gasping for air. Mila ran to me, tears streaming down her face. "I hate you, Daddy!" "You hurt, Mommy." Ethan stared at us, his expression a mix of shock and shame. Without a word, he turned and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. I held Mila close, my own tears falling freely. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's here. I won't let him hurt us anymore." As I comforted my daughter, a fierce determination filled my heart. Ethan had shown his true colors, and now it was time to make him pay for his sins. I would use every piece of evidence I had to destroy him, just as he had destroyed our family. In the days following the confrontation, Ethan became increasingly distant and cold towards Mila and me. He spent long hours locked away in his office, only emerging for brief, tense meals. I knew he was planning his next move, and I had to stay one step ahead. I met with Lila at a quiet cafe, the weight of my secret hanging heavy between us. She reached across the table, squeezing my hand in support. "How are you holding up, Zara?" I shook my head, exhaustion etched on my face. "I'm barely keeping it together, Lila. I feel like I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for Ethan to strike." Lila's eyes narrowed. "You need to keep gathering evidence. The more you have, the stronger your case will be." I nodded, pulling out my phone. "I've been recording his phone conversations with Jade. Listen to this." I pressed play, and Jade's voice filled the air, dripping with disdain. "When are you going to leave that pathetic excuse for a wife, Ethan? We could be so happy together without her dragging us down." Ethan's reply was muffled, but the intent was clear. "Soon, baby. I just need to make sure she doesn't get a penny in the divorce. She doesn't deserve anything." Lila's face contorted with disgust. "What a snake. You need to take him down, Zara. Hard." I tucked my phone away, a plan forming in my mind. "I know exactly what I'm going to do, but I need you to promise me something, Lila." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Anything. If something happens to me, I need you to take care of Mila. Make sure she knows how much I love her." Lila's eyes widened. "Zara, don't talk like that. Nothing's going to happen to you." I smiled sadly. "I hope you're right, but I have to be prepared for anything." Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into my revenge plan. I compiled a dossier of evidence against Ethan, from the hidden camera footage to the recordings of his conversations with Jade. I met with a lawyer who assured me that I had a strong case for full custody of Mila and a generous settlement. But I knew Ethan wouldn't go down without a fight. He started staying out late, coming home reeking of alcohol and perfume. He barely acknowledged Mila's presence, brushing past her as if she were a ghost. One night I confronted him as he stumbled through the door, his eyes bloodshot and his shirt askew. "Where have you been, Ethan?" He sneered at me, his words slurring together. "None of your damn business, Zara. I don't answer to you." I stepped closer, my voice low and dangerous. "You answer to your daughter, though. Or have you forgotten about her?" Ethan's face twisted with rage. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. "Don't you dare use Mila against me. You're the one who's tearing this family apart with your ridiculous fantasies of going back to school." I wrenched my arm away, my eyes blazing. "No, Ethan. You're the one who tore this family apart the moment you decided to cheat on me with your assistant." He stared at me, his mouth agape. "How did you?" I smiled coldly. "I know everything, Ethan, and soon everyone else will too." I turned to walk away, but Ethan's voice stopped me. "You'll regret this, Zara. I'll make sure you never see Mila again." I looked back over my shoulder, my voice steady. "You can try, Ethan, but I've got the truth on my side, and the truth always comes out in the end." As I walked away, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, but I was ready to fight for my daughter and my future. Ethan had underestimated me for the last time. The tension in our home had reached a boiling point. Ethan's anger simmered just beneath the surface, ready to explode at the slightest provocation. I walked on eggshells, trying to shield Mila from the worst of it, but I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came to a head. It happened on a rainy Tuesday evening. Ethan had been gone for days, claiming he was on a business trip. But I knew better. I had seen the charges on our credit card statement: expensive dinners, luxury hotels, and even a pair of diamond earrings that certainly weren't meant for me. When he finally walked through the door, I was waiting for him in the living room, Mila playing quietly at my feet. He barely glanced at us as he shrugged off his coat and tossed his keys on the table. "We need to talk, Ethan," I said, my voice steady despite the fear churning in my gut. He looked at me then, his eyes cold and hard. "I don't have time for your nagging, Zara. I've had a long day." I stood up, my hands clenched at my sides. "I'm sure you have. Busy spending our money on your mistress, were you?" Ethan's face twisted with rage. He took a step towards me, his voice low and menacing. "You don't know what you're talking about, Zara. I suggest you drop it." But I couldn't drop it. Not anymore. "I know everything, Ethan. The affair, the embezzlement, all of it. Did you really think you could keep it hidden forever?" He lunged at me then, his hands wrapping around my throat. I gasped for air, my eyes wide with terror. Mila screamed, her little voice piercing the air. "Daddy, stop! You're hurting Mommy." Ethan froze, his grip loosening. He stared at Mila, his face a mask of shock and shame. I pushed him away, coughing and sputtering as I tried to catch my breath. Mila ran to me, her arms wrapping around my legs. "I hate you, Daddy," she sobbed, her face buried in my skirt. "You're a bad man." Ethan stared at us, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Finally, he turned and stumbled out of the room, slamming the door behind him. I sank to the floor, gathering Mila in my arms. We cried together, our tears mingling on my shirt. I stroked her hair, whispering soothing words in her ear. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's here. I won't let him hurt us anymore." But even as I said the words, I knew they were a lie. Ethan had shown his true colors, and there was no going back. I had to get Mila and myself out of this toxic situation before it was too late. The next few days were a blur of activity. I met with my lawyer, who helped me file for a restraining order against Ethan. I packed our bags, taking only the essentials. Mila clung to me, her eyes wide and fearful. "Where are we going, Mommy?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. I kissed her forehead, trying to project a sense of calm I didn't feel. "We're going on a little adventure, baby. Just you and me. Won't that be fun?" She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She was too young to understand the gravity of the situation, but she knew something was wrong. As we drove away from the only home Mila had ever known, I felt a sense of both relief and dread. I knew I was doing the right thing, but I also knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. Ethan wouldn't let us go without a fight, and I had to be prepared for anything. But I also knew that I had the truth on my side, and the truth, as painful as it might be, would set us free in the end. Mila and I settled into our new life at the secret rental home, but the peace was short-lived. Ethan's behavior grew increasingly erratic, his anger and desperation palpable even from a distance. He bombarded me with phone calls and texts, alternating between pleading for forgiveness and hurling vicious insults. I did my best to shield Mila from the worst of it, but she could sense the tension in the air. She clung to me like a lifeline, her little face etched with worry. "When can we go home, Mommy?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. I hugged her close, my heart breaking at the thought of all she had endured. "This is our home now, baby. We're going to make a fresh start, just you and me." But even as I said the words, I knew that Ethan wouldn't let us go that easily. He was a man used to getting what he wanted, and he viewed Mila and me as his possessions, to be controlled and manipulated at will. I threw myself into gathering evidence against him, determined to build an airtight case. I spent long hours poring over financial records and phone logs, piecing together the puzzle of his deceit. Late one night, as Mila slept peacefully in her bed, I stumbled upon a goldmine of information. Ethan had been sloppy, leaving a trail of incriminating emails and text messages between himself and Jade. They spoke openly of their plans to flee the country together, using the embezzled funds to start a new life. My blood boiled as I read Jade's words, dripping with contempt for me and Mila. "I can't wait to be rid of that pathetic excuse for a wife," she wrote. "And as for the kid, we can always ship her off to boarding school. Out of sight, out of mind." I printed out the messages with shaking hands, my vision blurring with tears of rage. How could Ethan be so callous, so willing to abandon his own child? And Jade, what kind of woman could be so heartless, so eager to destroy a family for her own selfish gain? I added the printouts to my growing dossier of evidence, a sense of grim satisfaction filling me. Ethan thought he was untouchable, but he had no idea what I was capable of. I would make him pay for his sins, even if it meant burning down the life we had built together. The next day, I met with Jack, the private investigator who had been working tirelessly on my behalf. He greeted me with a smile, his eyes twinkling with anticipation. "I think we've got him, Zara," he said, handing me a thick folder. "This should be more than enough to nail the bastard to the wall." I flipped through the pages, my heart racing as I took in the damning evidence. Bank statements, surveillance photos, witness statements, it was all there, laid out in black and white. Ethan's carefully constructed facade was crumbling, and I held the sledgehammer that would bring it all crashing down. I looked up at Jack, my eyes shining with determination. "It's time," I said, my voice steady and strong. "Let's take this son of a bitch down." Jack nodded, his face serious. "I'll start making the necessary arrangements. You just focus on keeping yourself and Mila safe. This is going to get ugly before it gets better." I knew he was right. Ethan wouldn't go down without a fight, and I had to be prepared for anything. But I also knew that I had the truth on my side, and the love of my daughter to keep me strong. As I left Jack's office, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Ethan had underestimated me for the last time, and now he would pay the price for his betrayal. The day had finally arrived. Ethan was set to leave for another one of his work trips, but this time I knew exactly where he was going. He and Jade had planned a romantic getaway, a chance to flaunt their illicit love in the face of everything Ethan had once held dear. I watched from the window as he loaded his suitcase into the trunk of his car, whistling a jaunty tune. He had no idea what was about to hit him, no inkling of the storm that was brewing on the horizon. As soon as he pulled out of the driveway, I sprang into action. Mila and I had been living out of suitcases for weeks, our belongings carefully packed and hidden away. Now it was time to put our plan into motion. We loaded our bags into my car, Mila chattering excitedly about our adventure. She had no idea the gravity of the situation, no understanding of the betrayal that had led us to this moment. All she knew was that we were going somewhere new, somewhere far away from the pain and heartache of the past few months. As we drove away from the house that had once been our home, I felt a sense of both sadness and relief. I was leaving behind everything I had ever known, but I was also breaking free from the chains that had held me down for so long. We arrived at our secret rental home just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Mila ran inside, eager to explore our new surroundings. I followed more slowly, my heart heavy with the weight of what was to come. I unpacked our belongings with a sense of finality, knowing that there was no turning back now. I placed the divorce papers and the evidence of Ethan's crimes on the kitchen table, a silent testament to the truth that had been hidden for so long. And then, I waited. I knew it wouldn't be long before Ethan discovered our absence, before he realized that his carefully constructed world was crumbling around him. The phone rang just as I was putting Mila to bed, her little face peaceful in the soft glow of the nightlight. I answered it with a sense of calm, my voice steady and strong. "Zara, where the hell are you?" Ethan's voice was frantic, tinged with anger and fear. "I came home and everything was gone. What have you done?" I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "I've done what I had to do, Ethan. I've taken Mila and left. I know everything, the affair, the embezzlement, all of it. Did you really think you could keep it hidden forever?" There was a long pause, and then Ethan's voice came back, low and menacing. "You have no idea what you've done, Zara. I'll find you, and I'll make you pay for this. You and Mila belong to me, and I won't let you go without a fight." I laughed then, a harsh, bitter sound. "You're wrong, Ethan. Mila and I don't belong to anyone, least of all you. You've lost everything, and it's all your own doing. The divorce papers are waiting for you, along with all the evidence of your crimes. It's over, Ethan. You've lost." I hung up the phone before he could respond, my hands shaking with adrenaline. I knew that the battle was far from over, that Ethan would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. But I also knew that I had the truth on my side, and the love of my daughter to keep me strong. I checked on Mila one last time before heading to bed myself, my mind whirling with the events of the day. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new obstacles to overcome. But for now, I could rest easy, knowing that I had taken the first step towards a brighter future, a future free from the lies and betrayal of the past. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the turmoil that had engulfed my life. I woke early, my mind racing with the tasks that lay ahead. I had one more piece of the puzzle to put in place before I could truly break free from Ethan's grasp. I dressed quickly, leaving Mila in the care of my trusted friend and neighbor. She had been a lifeline throughout this ordeal, offering support and guidance when I needed it most. I knew that Mila would be safe with her, protected from the storm that was about to break. I drove to Ethan's parents' house with a sense of trepidation, my heart pounding in my chest. I had never been close with his family, but I knew that they needed to know the truth about their son. They deserved to know the man he had become, the monster that lurked beneath the surface. I rang the doorbell with shaking hands, my breath catching in my throat as Ethan's mother answered the door. She looked at me with surprise, her eyes widening as she took in my haggard appearance. "Zara, what are you doing here? Is everything all right?" I shook my head, my voice trembling as I spoke. "No, everything is not all right. I need to talk to you and your husband. It's about Ethan." She ushered me inside, her face etched with concern. Ethan's father was sitting in the living room reading the newspaper. He looked up as I entered, his brow furrowing in confusion. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. And then I began to speak. I told them everything, the affair, the embezzlement, the abuse. I showed them the evidence I had gathered, the proof of their son's betrayal. They listened in stunned silence, their faces growing paler with each passing moment. When I finished, Ethan's mother was openly weeping, her shoulders shaking with the force of her sobs. "I'm so sorry, Zara," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "We had no idea. We thought he was happy with you and Mila. We never imagined he could do something like this." Ethan's father stood up, his face hard with anger. "He's no son of mine," he said, his voice cold and unforgiving. What he's done is unforgivable. We'll stand by you, Zara. Whatever you need, we'll be there for you and Mila. I felt a rush of relief wash over me, a sense of vindication that I had never known before. I had been so afraid that they would take Ethan's side, that they would blame me for the breakdown of our marriage. But they had seen the truth, and they had chosen to stand with me. I thanked them, my voice shaking with gratitude. And then I left, my heart lighter than it had been in months. When I returned home, I found Mila playing happily in the living room, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded around her. I scooped her up in my arms, holding her close as I breathed in the sweet scent of her hair. "Mommy, where did you go?" she asked, her little face scrunched up in confusion. "I had to take care of some grown-up things, baby," I said, my voice soft and soothing. "But everything is going to be okay now, I promise." Just then the phone rang, shattering the peaceful moment. I answered it with a sense of dread, knowing exactly who it would be. "Zara, what the hell have you done?" Ethan's voice was raw with anger, tinged with a hint of desperation. "My parents just called me, telling me that they're cutting me off, that they're taking your side in all of this. What did you say to them?" I felt a sense of calm wash over me, a sense of power that I had never known before. "I told them the truth, Ethan. The truth about who you really are. The truth about what you've done. And now they know." "Everyone knows. It's over, Ethan. You've lost." The divorce proceedings were a blur of paperwork and legal jargon, but through it all, I held my head high. I had the truth on my side, and the support of those who mattered most. Ethan's parents were true to their word, standing by me and Mila every step of the way. Ethan, on the other hand, was a shell of his former self. He had lost everything, his job, his reputation, his family. Jade had abandoned him as soon as the scandal broke, leaving him to face the consequences of his actions alone. I watched from across the courtroom as he sat slumped in his chair, his face gaunt and haunted. A part of me felt a flicker of pity for him, a remnant of the love I had once felt. But then I remembered all the pain he had caused, all the lies he had told, and my heart hardened once more. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. I was granted full custody of Mila, along with a generous settlement that would ensure our financial stability for years to come. Ethan was left with nothing, his once promising future reduced to ashes. As I walked out of the courthouse, Mila's hand clasped tightly in mine. I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It was finally over. I was free. The months that followed were a time of healing and growth. I threw myself into my studies, determined to build a better life for myself and my daughter. Mila thrived in her new school, making friends and discovering new passions. I watched her blossom before my eyes, marveling at the resilience and strength that she possessed. She was a fighter, just like her mother. But even as we moved forward, the specter of Ethan lingered in the background. He had taken to drinking heavily, drowning his sorrows in a bottle. His once charming face was now bloated and ruddy, his eyes bloodshot and vacant. One day he showed up at our door reeking of alcohol and desperation. "Please, Zara," he slurred, his words barely intelligible. "I need to see Mila. I need to make things right." I stared at him coldly, my heart a block of ice in my chest. "You lost the right to see Mila the moment you chose Jade over your family, the moment you decided to lie and cheat and steal. You're not the man I married, Ethan. You're not the father Mila deserves." He recoiled as if slapped, his eyes filling with tears. "I know I messed up, Zara. I know I hurt you and Mila, but please, give me another chance. I can change, I swear." I shook my head, my voice firm and unyielding. "It's too late for that, Ethan. You had your chance and you blew it. Mila and I are better off without you. Now I suggest you leave before I call the police." He stared at me for a long moment, his face a mask of anguish and regret. And then he turned and stumbled away. His shoulders slumped in defeat. I watched him go, feeling a sense of closure wash over me. I had loved him once with all my heart. But that love had been tainted by his lies and betrayal, poisoned by his selfish actions. Now I was free to love myself and my daughter, to build a life that was filled with joy and purpose. I had emerged from the darkness stronger and wiser, a phoenix rising from the ashes of my broken marriage. As I closed the door and turned back to Mila, I felt a sense of hope and possibility fill my heart. The future was bright, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms. "Come on, baby," I said, scooping her up in a tight hug. "Let's go have some fun." And together we stepped out into the sunlight, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. We were survivors, Mila and I, and nothing could break us as long as we had each other. The shrill ring of the phone pierced through the thick veil of grief that had consumed me since Derek's passing. Reluctantly, I reached for the receiver, my hand trembling with a mix of dread and curiosity. "Lila, it's Eleanor," the stern voice at the other end announced, devoid of any warmth or condolences. My heart sank as I recognized the steely tone of my late husband's mother. Even in my darkest moments, she found a way to intrude, her presence as unwelcome as ever. "What do you want, Eleanor?" I mustered, my voice strained with barely concealed contempt. "I need you to move in with me," she stated matter-of-factly, as if making a simple request for groceries. "It's your duty as a daughter-in-law to care for me now that Derek is gone." I recoiled at her audacity, anger rising within me like a tidal wave. "Are you serious? Derek just died, and you're already trying to control me? I'm not your servant, Eleanor." "Don't take that tone with me, young lady," she snapped, her words dripping with disdain. "You owe me for all the sacrifices I've made for this family." I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to hurl the phone across the room. "You've done nothing but belittle and undermine me since the day I married Derek. Why should I subject myself to more of your abuse?" "How dare you speak to me like that?" Eleanor's voice rose to a shrill pitch, her rage palpable even through the receiver. "After everything I've done for you, this is the thanks I get? You ungrateful, selfish girl." "Enough," I shouted, my patience finally snapping. "I don't owe you a damn thing, Eleanor. Derek is gone, but that doesn't give you the right to dictate my life. I'm not coming to live with you, and that's final." With a defiant click, I slammed the phone down, severing the connection with a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt in years. Eleanor's toxic grip on my life had finally reached its limit, and I was determined to break free, no matter the cost. As I sank back into the couch, tears streamed down my face, a potent mix of grief and liberation. Derek's passing had left a gaping void in my heart, but it had also presented an opportunity, a chance to reclaim my identity and free myself from the shackles of Eleanor's cruelty. The words she had hurled at me echoed in my mind, a painful reminder of the countless times she had belittled and demeaned me, even in Derek's presence. But this time, something was different. A fire had been ignited within me, a burning desire to stand up for myself and confront the demons of my past. With trembling hands, I reached for a pen and paper, determined to put my defiance into writing. Eleanor's reign of terror would end, and I would emerge victorious, no matter the cost. As I set down the pen, my mind drifted back to the countless times Eleanor had made my life a living hell. Her words, sharp as daggers, had left invisible scars that ran deeper than any physical wound. One memory, in particular, resurfaced with a vengeance. It was the night Derek and I had gathered the courage to share our struggles with fertility, a moment that should have been met with compassion and understanding. "Mother, Lila and I have something to tell you," Derek had said, his voice heavy with trepidation. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, her lips pursed in a thin line of disapproval. "Well, out with it then. I haven't got all day." I swallowed hard, steeling myself for her reaction. "We've been trying to conceive for over a year now, but it hasn't been easy. The doctors say I may have issues with—" "Enough," Eleanor cut me off, her tone as cold as ice. "I don't want to hear about your feminine troubles, Lila. This is what happens when a woman puts off having children for her career." Derek's face flushed with anger, but before he could speak, Eleanor continued her tirade. "I sacrificed everything to raise my family, and this is how you repay me? By denying me the joy of grandchildren?" "Mother, that's enough," Derek snapped, but his words fell on deaf ears. Eleanor turned her withering gaze on me, her eyes burning with contempt. "Mark my words, Lila, if you can't give me grandchildren, you'll never be a true part of this family." The memory still stung like an open wound, a stark reminder of the emotional torment Eleanor had inflicted upon me. Her words had cut deeper than any knife, leaving me feeling inadequate and unworthy of Derek's love. But now, with Derek gone, Eleanor's cruelty had reached a new level of audacity. How dare she demand that I move in and care for her, as if I were her indentured servant? Anger coursed through my veins, fueling my determination to stand up to her once and for all. I would no longer cower in fear or shrink from her vile insults. With a newfound sense of resolve, I picked up the pen and began to draft a letter, a defiant declaration of my independence. Eleanor would learn that her reign of terror was over, and I would no longer be a willing participant in her twisted games. The words flowed effortlessly, each sentence a testament to my newfound strength and resilience. I would not be cowed by her demands or intimidated by her threats. This was my life, my future, and I would shape it on my own terms. As I sealed the envelope, a sense of empowerment washed over me. This was just the beginning, a simple act of defiance that would ignite a firestorm of consequences. Eleanor had underestimated me for far too long, and now she would face the wrath of a woman scorned. With a newfound determination, I slipped the letter into the mailbox, setting in motion a chain of events that would forever alter the course of my life, and my relationship with the woman who had once held such power over me. Days passed with no word from Eleanor, and I began to wonder if my letter had fallen on deaf ears. Perhaps she had finally accepted my decision and resigned herself to the fact that her control over me had come to an end. That naive hope was shattered one morning when the doorbell rang with a furious cadence. Hesitantly, I approached the door, peering through the peephole to see Eleanor's seething form on the other side. Taking a deep breath, I unlatched the lock and swung the door open, bracing myself for the onslaught. "How dare you?" Eleanor spat, her eyes blazing with fury. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? With disrespect and ingratitude?" I squared my shoulders, refusing to shrink from her wrath. "I owe you nothing, Eleanor. Derek is gone, and you have no claim over my life anymore." "No claim?" she seethed, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "I am your mother-in-law, and you will show me the respect I deserve." "Respect?" I scoffed, my own anger rising to the surface. "You've done nothing but belittle and demean me since the day I married Derek. When have you ever shown me an ounce of respect?" Eleanor's face contorted with rage, her lips curling into a sneer. "You ungrateful wretch! If it weren't for me, you'd have nothing. Derek was too good for you, and now you've thrown away your last chance at being part of this family." "I am not your property, Eleanor," I stated firmly, my voice unwavering. "I don't need your approval or your dysfunctional idea of family. I'm my own person, and I won't let you control me anymore." Eleanor's eyes narrowed, her gaze cold and calculating. "You'll regret this, Lila. Mark my words, I'll make your life a living hell. No one turns their back on me and gets away with it." With those chilling words, she turned on her heel and stormed away, leaving me standing in the doorway, my heart pounding in my chest. I had done it. I had faced my tormentor head-on and refused to back down. A sense of exhilaration coursed through me, mingled with a twinge of trepidation at Eleanor's parting threat, but I would not be deterred. For too long, I had lived in the shadow of her cruelty, allowing her to dictate the terms of my life. No more. This was my moment of defiance, and I would savor every second of it. As the adrenaline subsided, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride welling up within me. I had stood my ground, defended my autonomy, and emerged victorious. At least for now. Eleanor's words still echoed in my mind, a chilling reminder that this was far from over. She was a woman scorned, and I knew better than anyone the depths of her vindictiveness. But I was no longer the meek, cowering woman she had once known. Derek's passing had awakened a fire within me, a burning desire to reclaim my life and my self-worth. And if Eleanor thought she could extinguish that flame, she was sorely mistaken. With a newfound sense of determination, I closed the door on the past and all its demons. The battle lines had been drawn, and I was ready to fight, not just for myself, but for the future I deserved. In the weeks that followed, an uneasy truce settled over my fractured relationship with Eleanor. She had retreated into sullen silence, no doubt stewing in her bitterness and plotting her next move. I, however, refused to let her threats diminish my newfound sense of freedom. That fragile peace was shattered one Sunday afternoon when Derek's sister Claire invited me to a family gathering at her house. Despite my initial hesitation, I decided to attend, determined not to let Eleanor's toxicity dictate my life any longer. The moment I stepped through the door, I could feel Eleanor's icy glare boring into me from across the room. Her eyes narrowed as I made my way towards Claire, exchanging warm hugs and greetings with the other guests. "Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence," Eleanor sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The ungrateful daughter-in-law who turned her back on her family." A hush fell over the room as all eyes turned towards us, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation I knew was inevitable. "I am not ungrateful, Eleanor," I replied, my voice steady and unwavering. "I simply refuse to be manipulated and controlled by you any longer." Eleanor let out a derisive cackle, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "Manipulated? Is that what you call filial duty? You owe me everything, you selfish girl. If it weren't for my sacrifices, you'd have nothing." "That's enough, Mother," Claire interjected, her brow furrowed with concern. "Lila has been through enough without you adding to her pain." But Eleanor was relentless, her barbs striking with precision. "Pain? She knows nothing of true pain, not like the anguish I've endured watching my son's legacy wither on the vine thanks to her failures." I could feel the weight of her words like a physical blow, stirring up old insecurities and wounds I thought had healed. But this time, something was different. A fire burned within me, fueled by a newfound sense of self-worth and determination. "You're wrong, Eleanor," I stated firmly, my voice carrying through the stunned silence. "I may not have been able to give Derek children, but that doesn't make me a failure. My love for him was pure and unconditional, something you've never understood." Eleanor's face contorted with rage, but before she could respond, I pressed on, emboldened by the support of the onlookers. "You've had a twisted hold on this family for far too long, using guilt and manipulation to get your way. But I refuse to be a part of your dysfunction any longer. I am my own person, with my own dreams and ambitions, and I won't let you or anyone else diminish that." A murmur rippled through the crowd as Eleanor's mask of superiority began to crack. Her eyes darted from face to face, desperately seeking allies, but finding only expressions of shock and, in some cases, admiration. In that moment, I knew I had won a decisive victory, not just for myself, but for all those who had suffered under Eleanor's tyranny. The veil had been lifted, exposing her true nature for all to see, and there was no turning back. As Eleanor stormed out of the room, her face flushed with humiliation, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The shackles of her control had been broken, and I was free to embrace the future on my own terms, without the specter of her cruelty looming over me. It was a pivotal moment, a turning point in my journey towards self-discovery and empowerment. And as I looked around at the faces of my newfound allies, I knew that the battle had only just begun. The aftermath of the family gathering was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. On one hand, I felt a sense of triumph, having finally stood up to Eleanor and exposed her manipulative ways. But on the other, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger battle. As if on cue, my phone rang the following day, and I braced myself for another verbal assault from Eleanor. To my surprise, it was Claire's voice on the other end. "Lila, we need to talk," she said, her tone laced with urgency. "Can you meet me for coffee?" An hour later, we were seated at a secluded corner of a cafe, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafting between us. "I wanted to apologize for Mother's behavior," Claire began, her eyes clouded with shame. "What she said to you was inexcusable, and I'm sorry you had to endure that." I offered a small smile, touched by her sincerity. "It's not your fault, Claire. Eleanor has always been—" I trailed off, searching for the right words. "A vindictive, manipulative tyrant?" Claire finished for me, a rueful chuckle escaping her lips. "Believe me, I know better than anyone." My brow furrowed as I studied her expression, sensing a deeper story lurking beneath the surface. "What do you mean?" Claire took a deep breath, her fingers fidgeting with the handle of her mug. Growing up, Mother was relentless in her pursuit of perfection. Nothing we did was ever good enough, and she made sure to remind us of our flaws at every turn. A pang of recognition tugged at my heart as I listened to her words, memories of my own experiences with Eleanor's cruelty flooding back. Simon and I learned early on that the only way to survive was to either conform to her impossible standards or risk being cast aside. Claire continued, her voice tinged with bitterness. I chose the former, sacrificing my dreams to become the perfect daughter she demanded. And Simon? I prompted, sensing there was more to the story. Claire's expression darkened, her eyes clouding over with a mix of sadness and anger. He refused to bow to her will, and for that, Mother made his life a living hell. She belittled him, criticized his every move, and even tried to turn Derek against him. My heart clenched at the thought of Eleanor's cruelty extending beyond just me, her venom poisoning the lives of her own children. That's why I wanted to talk to you, Claire said, her gaze locking with mine. You're not alone in this fight, Lila. Simon and I were with you every step of the way. A wave of relief washed over me, and I realized that in my quest for independence, I had gained something even more valuable. Allies who understood the depths of Eleanor's toxicity. Thank you, Claire, I said, reaching across the table to give her hand a gentle squeeze. With you and Simon by my side, I feel like I can take on anything Eleanor throws at me. Claire's lips curved into a rare, genuine smile. That's the spirit. Mother may think she's invincible, but she's about to learn that she's messed with the wrong family. As we parted ways, a newfound sense of determination coursed through my veins. Eleanor had drawn the battle lines, but she had unwittingly assembled an army against her. An army united by a common goal, to break free from her tyranny once and for all. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel alone. With Claire and Simon by my side, I was part of something larger than myself, a movement fueled by the desire for justice and the pursuit of freedom from Eleanor's toxic grasp. And as I stepped out into the warm afternoon sun, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope ignite within me. The tide was turning, and Eleanor's reign of terror was about to meet its match. In the weeks following my alliance with Claire and Simon, an eerie silence descended upon my ongoing battle with Eleanor. It was as if she had retreated, licking her wounds and biding her time before launching her next attack. Little did I know, the calm was merely the eye of the storm, and Eleanor was busy weaving a web of deceit that threatened to unravel everything I had worked so hard to build. The first inklings of her scheme came in the form of whispers and sideways glances from acquaintances I encountered around town. At first, I brushed them off as mere curiosity, but as the murmurs grew louder, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something sinister was afoot. It all came to a head one afternoon when I stopped by the local cafe for my usual coffee break. As I waited in line, I overheard a conversation between two women seated at a nearby table, their voices hushed but audible enough for me to catch snippets of their exchange. Such a shame about Lila abandoning her mother-in-law like that, and after everything Eleanor has done for her too. Selfish and ungrateful, if you ask me. My heart pounded in my chest as I pieced together the fragments, realizing with growing horror that Eleanor had been spreading lies about me, painting me as the villain in our twisted narrative. Anger and disbelief coursed through my veins, but before I could confront the gossiping women, a familiar voice cut through the din. "Don't believe everything you hear," Claire said, her expression stern as she approached the table. "My mother is a master manipulator, and she's twisting the truth to suit her agenda." The women fell silent, their faces flushed with embarrassment at being caught in their indiscretion. Without another word, Claire beckoned me to follow her, and we swiftly exited the cafe. "Eleanor is up to her old tricks again," she fumed as we stepped onto the sidewalk. "Trying to turn the community against you by spreading vicious rumors." My mind raced, struggling to comprehend the depths of Eleanor's deception. But why? What does she hope to gain by turning people against me? Claire's expression hardened, her eyes narrowing with resolve. Isolation, alienation. She wants to break you down until you have no choice but to succumb to her demands. A chill ran down my spine as the realization sank in. Eleanor was waging a psychological war, using the very community I had called home as her weapon. "We can't let her get away with this," I said, my voice tinged with determination. "We need to expose her lies and show everyone the truth." Claire nodded, a glint of resolve in her eyes. "And we will. Simon and I have been gathering evidence, testimonies from others who have fallen victim to Mother's manipulation over the years. It's time we fought fire with fire." As we parted ways, a sense of purpose burned within me, fueling my resolve to take the fight to Eleanor. She had underestimated my strength, my resilience, and now she would face the consequences of her actions. Returning home, I immediately set to work, compiling every shred of evidence I had, from the hurtful words she had hurled at me over the years to the countless instances of emotional abuse. I pored over the documentation, meticulously organizing it into a damning case against Eleanor's tyranny. With each piece of evidence I uncovered, my determination grew stronger, solidifying my conviction that Eleanor's reign of terror must end, no matter the cost. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, a newfound sense of clarity washed over me. The battle lines had been drawn, and it was time to strike back. Not just for myself, but for every life Eleanor had sought to control and diminish. The time for retribution was nigh, and I would be the one to deliver the final blow, shattering Eleanor's carefully constructed facade and exposing her true manipulative nature to the world. The days leading up to the community event were a flurry of preparation and strategizing. Claire, Simon, and I pored over every last detail, ensuring that our plan to expose Eleanor's manipulation was airtight. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Simon asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "Once we pull the trigger, there's no going back." I met his gaze, my resolve unwavering. "I'm sure. Eleanor has tormented us for far too long. It's time she faced the consequences of her actions." Claire placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "We've got your back, Lila. No matter what happens, we're in this together." Finally, the day of reckoning arrived, and the tension was palpable as we made our way to the community center. Eleanor was already there, holding court with her usual air of superiority, oblivious to the storm that was about to be unleashed. As the event commenced, I could feel the weight of anticipation pressing down on me, my heart pounding in my chest. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the chance to expose Eleanor's true nature and reclaim my dignity once and for all. When my turn at the podium came, I took a deep breath, steadying myself for the confrontation that was about to unfold. As I stepped up to the microphone, Eleanor's eyes narrowed, sensing that something was amiss. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice ringing out clear and strong. "I'm sure many of you have heard the rumors circulating about me and my supposed mistreatment of Eleanor Turner." A murmur rippled through the crowd, heads nodding in acknowledgement of the whispers that had been spreading like wildfire. "Well, I'm here to set the record straight," I continued, my gaze locking onto Eleanor's, daring her to challenge me. "The truth is, it's not me who has been the manipulator and the abuser. It's Eleanor herself." Eleanor's face contorted with rage, her eyes blazing with fury as she realized what was unfolding. "How dare you?" she spat, rising from her seat. "You ungrateful, lying." But I didn't let her finish, pressing on with my damning expose. For years, Eleanor has subjected me to emotional and psychological torment, belittling me and making me feel worthless. And I'm not the only one. With a nod to Claire and Simon, they stepped forward, each holding a stack of documents and testimonies from others who had fallen victim to Eleanor's cruelty. "These are the accounts of people whose lives Eleanor has sought to control and manipulate, all in the name of her twisted sense of family duty," I declared, my voice reverberating through the stunned silence. One by one, the testimonies were read aloud, painting a vivid picture of Eleanor's reign of terror, a tapestry of lies, manipulation, and emotional abuse woven with startling clarity. As the final account echoed through the hall, all eyes turned to Eleanor, her once imperious demeanor shattered, replaced by a mask of humiliation and defeat. "You see," I said, addressing the stunned crowd, "Eleanor has been the true villain all along, using her position of power to subjugate and control those around her. But no more. Today, her lies and deceit have been exposed for all to see." A smattering of applause broke out, growing louder as more and more people joined in, their eyes filled with a mixture of shock and newfound respect. Eleanor, meanwhile, sat frozen, her lips trembling with a combination of rage and disbelief. In a single, climactic moment, her carefully cultivated facade had crumbled, revealing the ugly truth that she had so desperately tried to conceal. As the applause died down, I turned to face her one last time, my voice steady and resolute. "Your reign of terror is over, Eleanor. You have no power over me or anyone else anymore." With those words, I stepped down from the podium, my head held high, basking in the sweet taste of victory. The shackles of Eleanor's manipulation had been broken, and I was finally free to embrace the future on my own terms, unburdened by the weight of her toxicity. As I made my way through the crowd, surrounded by a chorus of congratulations and newfound respect, I couldn't help but feel a sense of profound relief and vindication. The battle had been long and arduous, but in the end, justice had prevailed, and the truth had set me free. Eleanor's reign of terror was over, and a new chapter in my life was about to begin, one filled with the promise of healing, growth, and the sweet taste of hard-won independence. In the weeks following my public exposure of Eleanor's manipulation, a profound shift took place within me. It was as if a weight had been lifted, a burden I had carried for far too long finally cast aside. The community's reaction had been overwhelmingly supportive, with many expressing admiration for my courage in standing up to Eleanor's tyranny. Some even shared their own stories of her cruelty, reinforcing the realization that I had not been alone in my suffering. Eleanor, however, had retreated into a self-imposed exile, her once formidable presence reduced to a mere shadow of its former self. Whispers circulated that she had become a recluse, too ashamed to face the world after her lies and deceit had been laid bare. For a fleeting moment, I felt a twinge of pity for the woman who had once wielded such power over me. But that fleeting sentiment was quickly extinguished by the memory of her cruel words and actions, a stark reminder of the emotional toll she had inflicted upon me and countless others. As the dust settled, I found myself at a crossroads, uncertain of what path to take next. The shackles of Eleanor's control had been broken, but the scars of her abuse still lingered, leaving me questioning my own sense of self-worth and purpose. It was during this period of introspection that an unexpected ally emerged, Derek's brother Simon. He had been a steadfast supporter throughout my battle with Eleanor, and now he became a source of guidance and support as I navigated the uncharted waters of my newfound freedom. "You know, Lila," he said one afternoon as we shared a cup of coffee, "you've been through hell and back, but you came out on the other side stronger than ever." I offered a wry smile, my fingers tracing the rim of my mug. "Sometimes I'm not so sure. Eleanor's words, her constant belittling, it leaves scars, Simon." He nodded, his expression understanding. "I know. Believe me, I've been there. But you can't let her win, not anymore. You've taken back control of your life, and now it's up to you to decide what comes next." His words struck a chord within me, igniting a spark of determination that had been flickering in the aftermath of my confrontation with Eleanor. He was right. I had fought too hard and sacrificed too much to let her toxic legacy continue to haunt me. From that moment on, I made a conscious effort to reclaim my sense of self, to rediscover the woman I had been before Eleanor's manipulation had taken root. I poured myself into my work, finding solace in the creative outlets that had once brought me joy. Slowly but surely, the shadows of Eleanor's cruelty began to recede, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose and self-assurance. As the months passed, I found myself surrounded by a network of supportive friends and allies, each one a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Claire and Simon remained steadfast pillars of strength, their unwavering loyalty a constant reminder that I was no longer alone in my journey. And though Derek's absence still weighed heavily on my heart, I found solace in the knowledge that he would have been proud of the woman I had become, a woman who had stared down her demons and emerged victorious, her spirit unbroken and her determination unwavering. As I stood on the balcony of my apartment one warm summer evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I couldn't help but reflect on the long and arduous path that had led me to this moment. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in my life, I embraced that uncertainty with open arms, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, I possessed the strength and resilience to overcome them. Eleanor's reign of terror was a distant memory, a mere footnote in the story of my life, a story that was just beginning to unfold, filled with the promise of growth, healing, and the sweet taste of hard-won independence. As the night sky blanketed the city, I felt a sense of peace wash over me, A peace born of the knowledge that I had reclaimed my power, my dignity, and my sense of self. The battles of the past had been fought and won, and now the future stretched out before me, ripe with endless possibilities. With a deep breath, I turned and made my way back inside, ready to embrace the next chapter of my life, a chapter written on my own terms, free from the shackles of Eleanor's toxicity and filled with the promise of a brighter tomorrow. I shuddered as Evelyn's words echoed through the pristine walls of my supposed new home. In this house, you'll learn to know your place. You're not family. You're just an outsider. My heart sank, but I forced a polite smile. Thank you for having me, I replied, clinging to Jack's arm as he squeezed my hand reassuringly. Evelyn's cold gaze swept over me with contempt before she turned away, barking orders about unpacking. As Jack helped carry our luggage upstairs, a sense of dread crept over me. Later that morning, I found myself alone in the vast kitchen, scrubbing every surface until my hands were raw. Remember, you have the cleaning to finish up before lunch. Evelyn's shrill voice rang out, and I flinched. Yes, Evelyn, I murmured, my shoulders slumping. This was not the warm welcome I'd envisioned. It was a stark contrast from just a year ago when Jack had proposed, his eyes shining with love. I never thought I'd find someone like you, Sophie. Will you marry me? Tears of joy had filled my eyes as I breathlessly accepted, unable to imagine a life without him. We were supposed to start our happily ever after together, but fate had other plans. Jack's job transfer meant moving to his hometown, and Evelyn had insisted we stay with them until we found our own place. At the time, her offer seemed genuine. I'm so glad you're here, Sophie. We're like family already. She had gushed, embracing me warmly. David, Jack's father, had echoed the sentiment. Welcome to your new home. Foolishly, I had believed their welcoming facade, comforted by the idea of having family nearby. But within days of our arrival, the truth unraveled. You call this clean? Do it again, and do it right, Evelyn had sneered, scrutinizing my efforts. When I tried to explain, she cut me off with a glare that chilled me to the bone. As the weeks passed, the abuse escalated, and I found myself drowning in a sea of impossible demands and endless chores. Desperate, I confided in my godmother, Rachel. Aunt Rachel, I don't know what to do anymore. I had sobbed into the phone, my voice trembling. Her firm tone offered solace. Come to me, dear. You don't have to go through this alone. With Rachel's guidance, I began documenting the mistreatment, determined to break free from this nightmare. Little did I know, the worst was yet to come. As I lay awake that night, my mind drifted back to happier times before this living hell began. Jack and I had met at a mutual friend's party, and from the moment our eyes locked, I knew he was special. We spent countless nights talking, sharing our dreams and aspirations over cheap wine and greasy pizza. Jack made me feel alive in a way I'd never experienced before. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, he had whispered one evening as we strolled hand in hand through the park. My heart raced, and I could barely form the words. I want that too. A few months later, Jack proposed in that same park, getting down on one knee as the setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink. I never thought I'd find someone like you, Sophie. Will you marry me? Tears of joy streamed down my face as I nodded fervently. Yes! I can't imagine my life without you. We were polar opposites in many ways, but our love transcended any differences. While I was a free-spirited artist, Jack was a driven businessman. Yet we complemented each other perfectly. Little did I know that our blissful union would be shattered by the very people who should have welcomed me with open arms. After the wedding, Jack's company offered him a prestigious promotion, but it required relocating to his hometown. Reluctantly, we agreed, naively believing Evelyn and David's promises of support. We're so excited to have you both here, Evelyn had gushed, pulling me into a suffocating embrace. You're family now. David had nodded enthusiastically, patting Jack on the back. Our little boy is finally settling down. In those early days, Evelyn doted on me, offering to help with meal planning and household chores, but it didn't take long for the mask to slip. This isn't how I do laundry, she'd snap, rewashing entire loads despite my protests. Gradually, her demands escalated, and any attempt to reason with her was met with a torrent of insults and criticism. Useless, just like your mother, she'd hiss, her eyes blazing with contempt. Jack tried to intervene, but Evelyn played the victim, accusing me of disrespecting her in her own home. Slowly, she drove a wedge between us, exploiting Jack's blind devotion to her. Trapped in a cycle of abuse, I began to lose myself, my once vibrant spirit dimming with every cruel remark and impossible task. But Aunt Rachel's phone call reignited the spark within me, reminding me of my strength and worth. With her guidance, I started documenting every incident, compiling a dossier of evidence against my tormentor. Evelyn had no idea the gathering storm brewing, oblivious to the tsunami of karma barreling towards her. With Aunt Rachel's support, I felt a renewed sense of determination. She had promised to gather evidence against Evelyn and her shady business practices, but first, I needed to play along and keep up appearances. "You look radiant today, Evelyn," I said with a forced smile as she strutted into the kitchen one morning. She paused, eyeing me suspiciously, before a sickly sweet grin spread across her face. "Why, thank you, dear. I'm so glad you're finally learning." I suppressed a shudder, focusing on the pancake batter I was mixing. Evelyn sidled up beside me, running a perfectly manicured nail along the counter. "You know, Sophie, I had my doubts about you at first," she began, her tone dripping with condescension. "But you're shaping up to be a decent daughter-in-law." My grip tightened on the whisk as she continued. "Of course, you'll never truly be part of this family, but at least you're trying." I opened my mouth to respond, but she held up a perfectly manicured hand. "Ah, ah, ah! Don't ruin the moment with your incessant chattering." Swallowing hard, I nodded and returned to my task, grateful when she finally sauntered away. Later that day, as I was scrubbing the floors, Evelyn cornered me again. "You missed a spot," she sneered, pointing to an immaculate tile. "Honestly, Sophie, it's like you're not even trying." Before I could protest, she grabbed the bucket of soapy water and upended it over my head. I gasped, sputtering, as the foul-smelling liquid drenched me from head to toe. "Oops, clumsy me," Evelyn laughed, her eyes glinting with cruel amusement. "Now you'll have to start all over again." As she sauntered away, I fought back tears, my hands trembling with rage. How dare she treat me this way? I was her family, her daughter-in-law, not some servant to be abused and humiliated. But I knew better than to retaliate. Not yet, at least. Instead, I meticulously documented every incident, compiling a mountain of evidence against the woman who had made my life a living hell. In the evenings, Jack would return from work, oblivious to the daily torture I endured. Evelyn was an expert at putting on her saccharine mask, playing the doting mother and gracious hostess. "How was your day, darling?" she'd coo, kissing Jack's cheek as he entered the kitchen. He'd smile tiredly, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Exhausting, but it's all worth it to provide for my family." My heart would clench at his words, knowing that in Evelyn's twisted mind I was nothing more than an outsider, a burden to be tolerated. Still, I clung to the hope that one day Jack would see the truth, the monster lurking beneath his mother's carefully crafted facade. With Aunt Rachel's help, I knew that day would come sooner than Evelyn could ever imagine. The days blurred together in a haze of endless chores and verbal abuse. No matter how hard I tried, Evelyn always found fault with my efforts. "This kitchen is a disgrace," she spat one morning, surveying the immaculate countertops with disdain. "I could eat off these floors, and they'd be cleaner." I bit my tongue, refusing to rise to her bait. Evelyn prowled closer, her perfectly coiffed hair swaying with each step. "Well," she snapped, her eyes narrowing, "don't you have anything to say for yourself?" Stealing my resolve, I met her gaze evenly. "I've cleaned everything as instructed, Evelyn." Her lips curled into a sneer. "You call this clean? Do it again, and do it right." As she turned on her heel and stormed out, I felt the familiar sting of tears pricking my eyes. No matter how meticulously I worked, it was never enough for her. Later that afternoon, Evelyn caught me folding laundry in the living room. "Those creases are atrocious," she tutted, snatching a freshly pressed shirt from my hands. Before I could protest, she grabbed the iron from the board and pressed the scorching metal directly onto the fabric. The acrid stench of burning cotton filled the air as the shirt disintegrated beneath the searing heat. "There?" Evelyn smirked, tossing the ruined garment aside. "No more creases." I stared at the charred remains, my hands trembling with rage and disbelief. How could someone be so cruel, so utterly devoid of compassion? As the weeks dragged on, Evelyn's torment escalated to new heights. She would berate me for hours, finding fault with every aspect of my existence. No task was ever completed to her satisfaction, no effort deemed worthy. "Useless, just like your whore of a mother," she'd hiss, her words cutting deeper than any knife. I longed to scream, to fight back against her relentless onslaught. But I knew any retaliation would only give her more ammunition, more reason to turn Jack against me. So I endured, clinging to the hope that Aunt Rachel's plan would succeed. I documented every vile act ever inflicted upon me, building an ironclad case against the woman who had made my life a waking nightmare. Meanwhile, Evelyn played the part of the devoted matriarch to perfection whenever Jack was around. Her saccharine smile and sickly sweet words were a stark contrast to the venom she spewed the moment his back was turned. "How's my favorite daughter-in-law?" She'd simper, pulling me into a suffocating embrace as Jack entered the room. I'd force a tight-lipped smile, my muscles aching from the strain of maintaining the charade. "Just wonderful, Evelyn. You're too kind." Jack would beam, oblivious to the dark truth lurking beneath the surface. In those moments, I hated him for his blind devotion, his unwavering trust in the monster wearing his mother's skin. But deep down, I knew the fault wasn't his. Evelyn had spent years cultivating her carefully crafted facade, lulling everyone into a false sense of security before revealing her true, twisted nature. I vowed to be the one to tear that facade down, to expose her for the vile, manipulative creature she truly was. With each passing day, my resolve hardened, fueled by the knowledge that justice would soon be served. Evelyn had no idea the storm brewing on the horizon, the tsunami of karma barreling towards her with unstoppable force. Her reign of terror was nearing its end, and I would be the one to deliver the final, devastating blow. As the weeks crawled by, Evelyn's torment showed no signs of relenting. If anything, her cruelty only intensified, fueled by some twisted desire to break me completely. One evening, as I was clearing the dinner dishes, a sudden crash made me jump. I whirled around to find Evelyn standing over a shattered vase, her face contorted with rage. "You stupid, clumsy girl!" she screeched, advancing towards me with balled fists. "Look what you've done!" "I didn't," I stammered, backing away instinctively. Before I could finish, her hand lashed out, striking me across the face with stinging force. I gasped, my cheek burning as tears welled in my eyes. "Don't you dare talk back to me," Evelyn snarled, looming over me like a predator cornering its prey. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I was done being her punching bag, her verbal and physical target. Trembling with equal parts fear and fury, I reached for my phone and dialed the one person I knew I could trust. "Aunt Rachel, I don't know what to do anymore," I choked out between sobs, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a brief pause, then her familiar tone, firm and reassuring. "Come to me, dear. You don't have to go through this alone." Relief washed over me, tempering the rising panic. Aunt Rachel had always been my rock, my guiding light through life's darkest storms. If anyone could help me escape this nightmare, it was her. Evelyn must have sensed the shift in my demeanor, for her eyes narrowed dangerously. "Who are you talking to?" she demanded, snatching the phone from my hand. I flinched, bracing for another blow, but she simply sneered and tossed the phone aside. "No one can save you from me, Sophie. You're mine now, to do with as I please." Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I refused to show fear. Not anymore. With Aunt Rachel's help, I would find a way to break free from Evelyn's clutches once and for all. Over the next few days, we formulated a plan. Rachel would use her connections to investigate Evelyn's shady business dealings, gathering evidence of her misdeeds. Meanwhile, I would continue documenting the abuse, building an airtight case against my tormentor. "We'll bring that monster down, Sophie," Rachel vowed, her voice steely with determination. "She'll pay for what she's done to you, I promise." I nodded, my resolve strengthened by her unwavering support. No longer did I feel alone, trapped in a cycle of helplessness and despair. For the first time in months, I dared to hope for a future free from Evelyn's toxic grip. Of course, maintaining the charade around her and Jack grew increasingly difficult. Evelyn seemed to sense my newfound defiance, her taunts and mind games escalating in response. "What's wrong, dear? You look positively miserable," she'd purr, her sickly sweet tone dripping with false concern. I'd force a tight smile, biting back the torrent of rage simmering just beneath the surface. I'm fine, Evelyn, just tired. Her perfectly manicured nails would trail along my arm, sending involuntary shivers down my spine. Well, we can't have that, can we? Perhaps you need a little motivation to perk you up. The implied threat was clear, but I refused to cower any longer. Soon, very soon, the tables would turn, and Evelyn would finally get the comeuppance she so richly deserved. Just as Aunt Rachel and I were putting the final pieces of our plan into motion, a bombshell rocked the Benson household. Jack called an urgent family meeting one evening, his face etched with worry. "I have some difficult news," he began, running a hand through his tousled hair. "Our biggest client just pulled out of their contract. They're taking their business elsewhere." David slammed his fist on the table, his eyes wide with panic. "What? That account is half our revenue. How could this happen?" As the two men debated the dire financial implications, Evelyn sat in stony silence, her perfectly painted mask slipping ever so slightly. When she finally spoke, her voice was laced with quiet fury. "It can't be. It must be Sophie's doing." I recoiled as if struck, incredulous at her outrageous accusation. "What are you talking about? I had nothing to do with this." But Evelyn was beyond reason, her eyes blazing with barely contained rage. "Don't play dumb with me, you scheming little witch. You've been plotting against us all along, haven't you?" Jack tried to intervene, ever the peacekeeper. "Mom, that's enough. Sophie wouldn't she?" Evelyn cut him off, rounding on me with bared teeth. "Think about it, Jack. Ever since she wormed her way into our lives, things have gone downhill. This is just the latest in her twisted games." I opened my mouth to defend myself, but she pressed on relentlessly. "She's a cancer, poisoning everything she touches. We have to cut her out before she destroys us completely." David looked shell-shocked, torn between siding with his wife or his only son. Jack, bless his heart, tried valiantly to calm the situation. "Mom, you're not thinking straight. Sophie loves me. She would never intentionally hurt this family." His words only seemed to enrage Evelyn further. With a feral snarl, she lunged towards me, her perfectly manicured nails aimed straight for my eyes. I barely had time to flinch before Jack intervened, restraining his mother with surprising strength. "Enough!" he roared, his usually gentle demeanor replaced by righteous fury. "I won't let you treat my wife this way. Not anymore." For a brief, shining moment, I dared to hope that the blinders had finally fallen from Jack's eyes, that he would see Evelyn for the vile, manipulative creature she truly was. But old habits die hard, and Evelyn was a master of deception. Her expression shifted in an instant, crumpling into one of hurt disbelief as fat crocodile tears spilled down her cheeks. "My own son," she sobbed, pressing a trembling hand to her chest, "defending that snake over his own mother's well-being." Jack faltered, his resolve visibly wavering as the guilt trip took hold. Evelyn seized the opportunity, clinging to him with a desperate, almost feral intensity. "Think about what you're doing, Jackie. Think about your father and me, the people who raised you and loved you unconditionally. Are you really going to throw all that away for her?" And just like that, the spell was recast. I could see the conflicted emotions warring across Jack's face as he instinctively pulled away from my outstretched hand. I need some air," he muttered, stumbling from the room in a daze. As the door slammed behind him, Evelyn turned to face me once more, her expression triumphant and devoid of even an ounce of remorse. "You see what you've done, you wretched girl?" she hissed, advancing on me like a snake poised to strike. "You've turned my own flesh and blood against me. But mark my words, this war is far from over." Her words chilled me to the bone, but I refused to be cowed. Not anymore. Thanks to Aunt Rachel's diligent efforts, the evidence against Evelyn was mounting by the day. Soon she would face the ultimate reckoning, the consequences of her cruelty laid bare for all to see. The game was nearing its end, and this time I would be the victor. In the aftermath of Evelyn's explosive outburst, a tense silence descended over the household. Jack avoided me like the plague, haunted by the seeds of doubt his mother had so expertly planted. Evelyn, for her part, reveled in the discord she had sown. Whenever we crossed paths, she would grace me with a saccharine smile that didn't quite reach her cold, calculating eyes. "Trouble in paradise, dear," she'd simper, trailing a perfectly manicured nail along my cheek. I'd stiffen, biting back the torrent of rage threatening to spill forth. "Not at all, Evelyn. Jack and I are fine. Her laughter was like nails on a chalkboard. "If you say so, Sophie, but we both know the truth, don't we?" The words hung heavy in the air, an unspoken challenge that set my teeth on edge. In the meantime, Aunt Rachel's investigation was bearing fruit. She had uncovered a staggering paper trail of Evelyn's shady dealings, embezzlement, bribery, you name it. "The evidence is damning, Sophie," Rachel murmured during one of our clandestine meetings. "This should be more than enough to take that monster down for good." Relief washed over me at her words, tempering the growing sense of dread gnawing at my core. Soon, this nightmare would be over. I could finally break free of Evelyn's toxic grasp and start anew with Jack, far away from her poisonous influence. At least, that was the plan, until Evelyn went nuclear. It happened one evening at the dinner table. Jack had been brooding in silence throughout the meal, his brow furrowed with unspoken turmoil. Evelyn, ever the instigator, decided to poke the hornet's nest. "You've been awfully quiet lately, dear," she crooned, spearing a forkful of salad with deliberate precision. "Cat got your tongue?" Jack tensed, his knuckles whitening as he gripped his utensils. "Just leave it, Mom." But Evelyn was relentless, her voice taking on a sickly sweet edge. "Or perhaps you're still stewing over that little episode the other night? You know, when your darling wife tried to destroy this family?" The words hung in the air like a lead weight, and something inside me snapped. I could no longer remain silent in the face of her blatant lies and manipulation. "I spoke to Aunt Rachel," I blurted out, ignoring Jack's startled look, "and she spoke to your biggest client." This whole situation was inevitable. Evelyn's perfectly sculpted mask faltered, her eyes widening in shock and disbelief. "What did you say?" Emboldened, I pressed on recklessly. "Your company has been mismanaged for years, Evelyn. All Aunt Rachel did was point out the problems to your client, problems you conveniently chose to ignore." The air crackled with tension as Evelyn processed my words. Then, like a snake striking, she exploded in a burst of feral rage. "How dare you?" she screeched, launching herself across the table with talons outstretched. "You're ruining everything." Plates and glasses shattered around us, as Jack tried in vain to restrain his mother's frenzied assault. David looked on in stunned silence, utterly paralyzed by the unfolding chaos. In that moment, everything crystallized for Jack. As he met my gaze, terror and heartbreak warring in his eyes, I knew the scales had finally fallen away. His mother's true nature, her vicious cruelty and boundless greed, was laid bare before him, a hideous truth he could no longer ignore. The blinders were off, and the facade had finally crumbled to dust. Evelyn Benson, matriarch and master manipulator, had been exposed, and she had no one to blame but herself. The aftermath of Evelyn's meltdown was nothing short of cataclysmic. As the dust settled and the shattered remnants of our once pristine dining room came into focus, an eerie silence descended. Jack was the first to break it, his voice thick with a potent mix of anguish and barely restrained fury. "Mom, what have you done?" Evelyn, always the master of deflection, immediately shifted into victim mode. "Me?" she wailed, clutching her carefully tousled hair. That snake is the one who's turned you against your own family." But her fragile guise was already crumbling, the cracks in her facade widening with each frantic excuse. David, for his part, seemed to be viewing his wife through new, painfully clear lenses. "Enough, Evelyn," he rumbled, his usually jovial demeanor replaced by a grim resolve I'd never witnessed before. "The jig is up. We know what you've done." Evelyn's perfectly painted mask slipped completely at his words, revealing the snarling beast lurking beneath. "You pathetic old fool," she spat, rounding on her husband with balled fists. "After everything I've sacrificed for this family, this is how you repay me?" A cruel laugh ripped from her throat as she whirled to face me once more. "And you conniving little bitch, you think you've won, don't you? That you can just waltz in and destroy everything I've built?" Jack stepped between us, shielding me from his mother's wrath. "Mom, you've done enough damage. Leave now before I call the police." His words seemed to douse Evelyn's fury in an instant, her expression shifting from outrage to disbelief. "Jackie, you can't mean that. I'm your mother." But Jack was immovable, his jaw set in a hard line as he steeled himself against her manipulations. "Not anymore. The woman I knew is gone, replaced by this monster." Evelyn's hands flew to her mouth, but the words kept pouring from him in an unstoppable torrent. You've lied, cheated, and abused everyone around you for far too long. Well, no more. I want you out of this house and out of our lives for good." An anguished wail tore from Evelyn's throat as the reality of her situation finally sank in. "No. Please, Jackie, I'll do anything, just don't." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. Jack simply shook his head, his expression a mask of grim determination. "I gave you too many chances, Mom. This is the path you chose." As Evelyn dissolved into a pathetic heap of sobs and recriminations, David stepped forward, his face etched with a weariness I'd never seen before. "You heard him, Evelyn," he said, his voice laced with defeat. "Pack your things, we're done." For a fleeting moment I almost felt sorry for the once formidable woman crumpled at our feet. Almost. But the memories of her cruelty, her vicious torment, were still too raw, the scars too fresh. As David ushered his wife from the room, Jack turned to me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Sophie, I'm so sorry. For everything." I opened my mouth to respond, but he barreled on, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "You were right all along. I was blinded by her lies and manipulation. I should have protected you, stood up for you." Gently I took his hand, feeling the weight of his anguish in the trembling grip. "It's okay, Jack. You couldn't have known." But he was already shaking his head, his expression haunted. "No excuses. I failed you in the worst way possible. But I promise, from now on, things will be different." As I gazed into the eyes of the man I loved, I saw a renewed sense of purpose burning within their depths. The shackles of Evelyn's toxic influence had finally been shattered, and we were free to start anew. It would be a long road to healing, but we would walk it together, stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. Evelyn's reign of terror was over, and in its wake, a new chapter was just beginning to unfold.